Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by randombullshit9 on Wattpad. Now let's start. The office was a dump by most standards. Peeling wallpaper hung like dead skin from the walls, yellowed by years of smoke and neglect. The lone ceiling fan spun lazily, squeaking with every rotation like it resented still being alive. A crooked diploma hung behind the scratched mahogany desk, Saori Midoriya, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, barely visible beneath a fine layer of dust and a pinned parking ticket she hadn't paid in 3 years. The room smelled like cold coffee, legal ink, desperation, and cigar smoke. Saori sat behind her desk, legs kicked up, green pantsuit rumpled, heels off and resting on top of a stack of unfiled court motions. A thick cigar rested between her fingers, smoldering gently, casting trails of smoke that curled like ghosts toward the stained ceiling. Her shirt was half unbuttoned as usual, her tie undone like a loose noose around her neck. Her eyes, emerald and unreadable, were locked on the TV hanging from the corner of the room. A news report played on loop, symbol of evil, all for one's coma ends, still no trial date. Her lips twitched. Coma ends. Like that bastard ever wasn't awake, she muttered, taking another drag. Government's more scared of him than they are of actual nukes. Her phone buzzed. Not the cell, the landline. Saori slowly turned her head, frowning. That line didn't ring anymore. She hadn't paid the service in months. It shouldn't have been connected. She stared at it as if it had just grown a second head. It rang again. She leaned forward, letting the cigar dangle from the corner of her mouth. Ash fluttered down onto her already ruined case files. The name on the display wasn't a number. It was a word. Tartarus. Saori blinked. Laughed once. You've got to be kidding me. She picked it up and placed the receiver to her ear. Midoriya. There was silence at first. Then came a voice that could only be described as rotted velvet. Smooth and poisonous, like a silk sheet wrapping around a blade dipped in cyanide. Saori Midoriya. You're looking well. Still smoking, I see. Her expression didn't change. She exhaled a stream of smoke toward the speaker. Hello, all for one. Or should I call you, prisoner #A0001. You know, your voice sounds younger than I imagined for a half-mummified sociopath. He chuckled. It was quiet, but it slithered through the phone line like an oil slick. Still sharp-tongued. That's good. I need someone sharp. Someone capable. Someone willing to see through this facade of justice. Cut the CRP. What do you want? Simple. I want a trial. She blinked. Laughed again, but there was no humor this time. A trial? You mean that thing the government skipped because the mere idea of you opening your mouth in public makes them wet themselves? That trial? Exactly that one. Saori leaned back, eyes narrowing. The cigar was now forgotten between her fingers. You're never getting out of Tartarus. They've got you buried under 100 legal black holes. They'll wheel your corpse out in a box sealed with 20 hero signatures and call it justice. That's why I need you. You know how to force the system's hand. How to twist the law until it screams in compliance. You're asking me to put the devil himself on the witness stand. If I am the devil, then you, Saori, are the one who gives him legal representation. I want my day in court. And handsomely, for the privilege. Saori was silent. Not out of shock, but calculation. She'd represented monsters before. Assassins, war profiteers, rogue quirk doctors, quirkless supremacists, and even a hero who sold child trafficking routes to the 𝐒𝐿𝐻. She had stared evil in the eye and billed it hourly. But this was all for one. The bogeyman of the hero age. The man responsible for generations of death, chaos, and power-mongering. A living legend of terror. He shouldn't be allowed a voice. And yet, that same voice now offered her a deal. How much? He chuckled again, deeper this time. 500 million yen, deposited into 16 offshore accounts in your name. Untouchable. I'll also throw in one favor, redeemable at any time, no matter the scope. You'll never want for money or safety again. She took a long drag, the end of the cigar flaring like a devil's eye. That's a fortune, even by villain standards. I always pay for the best. She flicked ash into a coffee cup filled with something long past drinkable. Her mind moved faster than most supercomputers, running through possibilities, outcomes, risks. She could be arrested for even answering this call. She could lose her license. She could become the most hated woman in Japan. Or the most feared. This was more than just a case. It was a bomb, one that, if she lit the fuse just right, could tear open the rotted belly of hero society and expose every dirty secret hidden beneath the capes and propaganda. Saori Midoriya grinned slowly. All right, you son of a bitch. I'll do it. There was a pause. Then, a hiss of satisfaction. Excellent. But let's get one thing straight, she said, voice now like ice on steel. This isn't about you. This isn't about justice. This is about what I want, what I can make this trial do for me. If I get even a whiff that you're using me for some deeper plan, I'll burn this case down around your goddamn ears and make sure they shove your breathing tube up the wrong hole. You were always meant for greater things, Miss Midoriya. She hung up. The phone clicked with finality. The room was dead quiet except for the gentle hum of the ceiling fan. Saori sat there for a moment longer, then stubbed out her cigar with a sharp twist. Her eyes were sharp, focused. She stood, buttoned her jacket, only one, just enough to mean business, and grabbed her briefcase. As she reached the door, she stopped. This is gonna piss us off, everyone. A grin stretched across her face. Good. She walked out. The devil had made his call. And now the devil had a lawyer. Saori's heels clacked sharply against the polished floor of the Tokyo Central Courthouse archives, each step echoing like a countdown to a bomb only she could hear ticking. Her green suit jacket fluttered slightly behind her with every stride, tie still loosened, 2 buttons still undone. But today, there was a different energy to her. A current of raw, surgical focus. The mission was impossible on paper. Force the Japanese government to give all for one, the single most dangerous being on record, an open trial. A transparent judicial procedure for the man who'd shattered cities, stolen countless quirks, and murdered thousands across a century of violence. But Saori Midoriya didn't believe in impossible. She believed in legal precedent. She lit another cigar, despite the dozen signs warning against it in the building, and began pulling records with ruthless precision. She flipped through old court filings, obscure quirk regulation amendments, declassified hero policies from before the rise of All Might. Everything had a pattern, and Saori knew how to read it. 3 hours in, she struck gold. A dusty 207-page legal provision, buried deep in the Quirk Regulation and Public Defense Act of year 2127, last amended 70 years ago and all but forgotten. Originally designed to prevent public lynchings of accused villain sympathizers during the early hero age, it guaranteed that any Japanese citizen, even one deemed a national threat, was entitled to a trial if they requested it via legal proxy. The key phrase: no individual detained without formal sentencing may be indefinitely incarcerated without judicial review. If legal representation is acquired and motions are filed in accordance with Articles 8 to 17 of the National Defense Code. It was vague, outdated, dangerous. It was perfect. Within 24 hours, Saori filed Motion 117X, demand for judicial review and trial commencement with the Tokyo High Court. She invoked Article 8 of the National Defense Code, guaranteeing all detained citizens the right to a timely trial, regardless of quirk classification. Clause 14. 3 of the Hero Oversight Bylaws, which required government transparency if requested by licensed attorneys acting on behalf of high-threat detainees. International Quirk Rights Accord, subsection 3D, forcing the Japanese government to provide humane due process or risk losing international funding and UN status in human rights metrics. The UN Charter Oversight Clause unratified but public, to subpoena former pro-heroes to testify on their knowledge of unsanctioned government ops. And, finally, the Exceptional Clause of Judicial Curiosity, an archaic law that allowed for a public trial if a case was deemed to contain extraordinary legal precedent or historical value. The paperwork storm she unleashed hit Japan like a rogue quirk incident. By the next week, news outlets were ablaze. All for one demands trial, attorney cites legal injustice. Hero society in uproar, Saori Midoriya defends Japan's greatest monster. Tokyo High Court confirms trial review hearing, first for a national villain. Saori, the snake, Midoriya, criminal or constitutional genius. The Prime Minister's office released a panicked statement. The Public Safety Commission went into emergency meetings. Tartarus released a memo declaring all for one nonverbal and unresponsive, attempting to dismiss the claim, but Saori, ever the vulture, counterfiled an affidavit from Tartarus nurses and a leaked visitation log. He was speaking fine last week, she told reporters outside the courthouse, puffing calmly on her cigar. Would you like to see the audio recording? Behind the scenes, she fought a war. Judges threatened to throw the case out. Heroes protested. Pro-hero lawyers called her a disgrace. She responded with an injunction against the Tokyo Metropolitan Police for illegal indefinite detainment and filed a request for emergency injunction on torture conditions in Tartarus, citing unconstitutional quirk suppression measures. She forced the hand of the judiciary by threatening a Supreme Court escalation with international media backing. She even sent a subtle letter to the UN, Human Rights Quirk Division. Then came her coup de grace. She filed a motion to subpoena All Might, Endeavor and several high-ranking heroes, under the Hero Oversight Clause, for public accountability testimony, claiming their involvement in unsanctioned lethal operations and the suppression of legal rights for high-risk detainees. By week 3, Japan's legal system was on the verge of collapse. And Saori? She stood untouched, smiling, sharp as ever, sipping bad vending machine coffee on the steps of the courthouse. When the official document came down, trial proceedings authorized, All for One versus Hero Commission et al., the world stopped. It was happening. For the first time in nearly 100 years, All for One was going to speak publicly. A full trial. Witnesses. Cross-examinations. Media coverage. Saori sat alone in her office that night, lights off, city lights bleeding through her blinds like veins across the wall. She leaned back in her chair, cigar glowing like a star in the gloom. She didn't smile. Not this time. Because she had just turned the justice system upside down, and she knew exactly what kind of monsters would crawl out once the lights were on. And the best part, she wasn't defending him because he deserved it. She was defending him because the law said he could be defended. And that, to her, was the greatest weapon of all. The air inside Tartarus was the kind that clung to your skin and whispered in your ear, "You don't belong here." The secure elevator hissed as it descended deep beneath the sea floor. Every meter it dropped accompanied by the hum of maglocked seals disengaging one by one. Even the walls of the seemed alive, breathing, groaning under the pressure of both ocean and silence. Saori Midoriya stood alone in the back corner of the elevator, green suit crisp, cigar unlit but resting behind her ear like a promise. Her ID hung on a lanyard, forged to bypass every security checkpoint between the surface and hell. Her emerald eyes were calm, but her mind was on fire. This wasn't just another client. This was All for One, the king of quirk theft, the orchestrator of 100 atrocities. The boogeyman children were told would steal their quirks in the night. The man who once stood toe-to-toe with the symbol of peace and made the world tremble. And she was his lawyer. The elevator hissed again. Final stop. Section, Black Iron Vaults. The doors opened to a hallway made entirely of reinforced carbon alloy, lined with turret nodes, scanners, and more kill switches than Saori cared to count. A small group of heavily armed guards stood at attention, each one stiff with a mix of confusion and fear. No one came down here. Not unless someone was being buried. One of the guards stepped forward, a sweat-stained clearance tablet in hand. Midoriya-san. Warden's orders. Audio and visual feed will be disabled during the visit, per your motion. We'll be watching the outside perimeter only. Saori didn't even blink. Now leave. He looked like he might object, but her eyes said, I will bury you in so many injunctions you'll be filing paperwork in hell. They left. She was alone now. With him. The door to cell 0 unsealed with a slow, mechanical groan. Inside, the lights flickered to life, dim, clinical. The cell was a sterile cube made of soundproof metal, lined with quirk suppression pylons that hummed like a sleeping dragon. And there he sat. All for one. Strapped to a steel chair by a web of restraints more advanced than anything Saori had ever seen. His breathing apparatus extended from a sleek, matte black helmet, feeding air into the ruined remains of a once formidable body. He looked smaller now. Diminished. But his presence was still enormous. As if the room itself leaned in to listen when he spoke. Saori walked in without flinching. Set her briefcase down on the table bolted to the floor. She slid the cigar into her mouth, lit it, and took a long drag. The glow lit her face like a slow-burning fuse. Then she exhaled. Thick smoke drifted toward the ceiling. Well, she said, voice cool. Let's get to work. All for one's voice slithered through the respirator like oil through cloth. You came. Saori sat down across from him, crossing her legs, elbows on the table. She glanced at the camera in the upper corner. The red recording light was off. No witnesses. No tapes. Just attorney-client privilege. Now, she leaned forward. What's the play? A low hum echoed from the machine bolted into his chest. Then a dry chuckle. You're every bit the shark they say you are. I didn't crawl through legal sewage for 3 weeks to be buttered up by a corpse with a cult. Cut the flattery. You wanted this trial. You pulled me into this with a fortune and a favor. Now tell me, what's the endgame? There was a pause. And then he began. Public exposure. Saori blinked. That's it. I want to speak. On record. On broadcast. I want the people to hear my story. Your story, she said, laughing once. What, you gonna weep on the stand and say society made you do it? You think they'll buy that sob story from a monster who's killed more people than smallpox? I don't care if they believe me. His voice darkened. I care that they listen. The lights flickered. Saori narrowed her eyes. You want to poison the narrative. I want to correct it. He leaned forward as far as his restraints allowed. They've told their version of history for decades. A sanitized fable where heroes always win and villains are mindless beasts. I built an empire because I saw truth in the cracks. The people will see that truth once I remind them where to look. And what makes you think I'll help you spew that CRP? Because you hate them too. Silence. She didn't respond. Not immediately. He continued. They tried to erase you. You, a quirkless woman, buried under a system that never wanted you to succeed. You carved your name into a world that didn't give you permission. You fight for clients no one else will touch, because you know the law isn't justice. It's leverage. Just like me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Saori tapped ash into a disposable tray. You're not wrong. I never am. She leaned back. Her voice, when it came, was measured. Cold. So, you want a stage? A trial is a stage. I give you the floor, you ramble about your ideology, your history, your truth. What then? That is the end. No escape plan. No riot. No body-doubling, brain-hopping villain trick. No. Bullshit. I'm dying, Saori. He said it simply. The body fails. The mind, freight. I have months left, perhaps a year. I don't intend to spend it as a ghost in a box. I will die seen. I will not vanish like a lie beneath the waves. I want them to see what they built, what their heroes truly fought to bury. She stared at him, eyes searching, testing. And she saw it. Not weakness. Conviction. Twisted. Rotten. But real. Saori took one last drag. Then leaned forward. Fine. You want your stage. I'll give it to you. But I control the tempo. You say a single word that breaks the agreement, that puts me or my case in jeopardy, I bury you alive in paperwork and they'll throw away the key to your oxygen tank. Understood. Perfectly. She stood, flicked the spent cigar onto the floor, and crushed it under her heel. I'll see you in court, client. As she turned to go, his voice drifted after her one last time. Saori. She paused. What? Thank you. She didn't turn around. Don't thank me. Her voice was sharp and final. I'm not doing this for you. And with that, she left the cell, green suit fluttering like war banners in the sterile air. Outside the vaults, the guards looked shaken. No one spoke. Saori walked past them, lighting a fresh cigar. The trial of the century had begun. And only she knew how deep the rabbit hole really went. The thunderstorm broke over Tokyo like a wrathful god had taken the stand. Lightning raked across the skyline, illuminating the silhouette of Saori Midoriya as she stood alone in her office, a mountain of legal binders on one side, 3 phones buzzing on the other, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey between them. She wasn't drunk. She was fueled. Rain lashed the windows in sheets. Her cigar glowed like a beacon through the dim haze of her office light. With every puff, every clatter of keys, every snarl of her voice down the line, Saori wasn't just building a defense. She was building a war machine. Exculpatory evidence hunt, buried truths. Saori knew she couldn't argue innocence, not traditionally. What she could do was undermine the structure of the government's case. Brick by brick. Her first move. A massive Freedom of Information Act FOIA blitz. Using ancient and obscure procedural codes, she filed over 120 FOIA requests across 37 government departments, from the Public Safety Commission to hero agencies, medical institutions, and old police precincts, digging into anything that touched All for One's decades of activity. She requested archived arrest records from quirkless persecution eras, decommissioned investigation files relating to the early League of Villains, hero official correspondence logs involving battlefield executions of villain detainees, unpublished tactical field reports from All Might's raids, old case files that had mysteriously vanished from digital databases after All for One's capture. She didn't need all of it to be useful. She just needed the possibility of buried misconduct. And when the government tried to delay the requests, she sued. By the end of the week, 5 judges had ruled in her favor. The information floodgates opened. Expert testimony. Let the scholars speak. Next came the experts. She didn't need pro-heroes. She needed academics, engineers, ethicists, historians, people whose reputations weren't built on popularity, but on publication. She subpoenaed Dr. Rui Tanaka, a quirk evolution biologist, to testify on how All for One's power might have originated through natural anomaly rather than intentional malice. Professor Sayaka Hoshino, a legal historian, to speak about systemic villain classification bias in post-quirk law. Former Tartarus architect Hideo Fushimi, to question the legality of indefinite quirk suppression and sensory deprivation. Quirkless rights activist Yasuo Arakawa, to frame All for One's early life as a quirkless man during a time of widespread discrimination. Every one of them hated the idea of defending All for One. But none could resist the chance to challenge the very laws that let the government sweep monsters under the rug. And Saori. She promised each of them something rare, uncensored, nationwide testimony. Witness list. A parade of ghosts. Her witness list read like a who's who of Japan's suppressed history. Not supporters. Victims. Saori scoured psychiatric records, crime scene reports, and war zone documentation. She hired private investigators to locate long-forgotten individuals who'd survived the battles between All for One and Japan's elite. She found Misaki Fujimura, whose entire town was raised in a villain-hero battle when she was 6. She blamed both sides. Akihiko Mori, a former sidekick of a hero who'd used his quirk to silence villain witnesses before they could testify. Dr. Etsuko Watanabe, a trauma surgeon who worked on both villain and hero victims, and kept unsanctioned autopsy files. Saori brought them all in under pseudonyms, placed them in protective housing, and had their testimony pre-recorded in case the government tried to disappear any of them. She wasn't stupid. You don't build a case against the Hero Commission without planning for arson. Subpoenas and legal traps. Binding the Giants, the crown jewel of her pretrial prep was a sweeping series of subpoenas aimed directly at the Hero Commission, high and key public figures. She served All Might / Toshinori Yagi, to account for the full nature of his powers, the fights with All for One, and his cooperation with secret Black Ops. Endeavor / NG Todoroki, to challenge his involvement in civilian endangering operations and torture allegations in villain custody. Nizu, to account for the school's cooperation with government intelligence networks. Principal members of the Public Safety Commission, to testify on the unsanctioned disappearances of mid-level villains under national threat clauses. She invoked the People's Oversight Clause of Article 33, forcing these figures to respond on the record, with refusal punishable by imprisonment or contempt. They tried to file counter motions. Saori had counter motions waiting on the same day. Motion bombs. The clockwork defense, she didn't stop there. To prevent the trial from being fast-tracked or dismissed, Saori flooded the court with a matrix of protective motions. Motion for pretrial discovery extension, granting her weeks of data review time to prevent rush proceedings. Motion for forensic archive preservation, preventing government document purging. Motion for multilingual record translation, delaying proceedings via bureaucratic necessity after she added 40-plus old documents written in Russian, Mandarin, and Tagalog. Motion to allow historical reenactment testimony, just to see if the court would let her bring in a visual projection expert. And every one of these motions came with binding precedents from 50-year-old trial archives or international legal theory. The prosecution couldn't move without stepping on a mine. The office of Saori Midoriya, command center of chaos, her office had transformed into a war bunker. Stacks of annotated evidence. Walls lined with pinboards, maps, red string, and facial recognition stills. 3 interns she hadn't slept in days. An AI data parser she rented from a startup in Singapore. Every minute of every day, Saori outworked them. She didn't rest. She didn't flinch. And she didn't care about guilt or innocence. Because the moment they agreed to hold a trial, she had already won the first war. They had to play by her rules. In a rare quiet moment, Saori stood by her window, looking over the neon-soaked Tokyo skyline. She took a long drag of her cigar, then flicked the ash into her whiskey glass. You wanted your stage all for one. I just built the DMN amphitheater. And beneath the rumble of thunder, she smiled. A shark's smile. The entire country watched. From Shinjuku skyscrapers to rural villages, from bars to classrooms, from hospital rooms to underground bunkers, the world held its breath. The trial of All for One had begun. In a courtroom specially constructed in the fortified center of Tokyo, rimmed with thick plex alloy barriers and surrounded by private security, international observers, and a digital news presence unlike anything seen since the fall of Kamino Ward, the central figure, still bound, still restrained, sat like a corpse on a throne. And beside him sat Saori Midoriya, hair braided into a tight ponytail, loose green pantsuit tailored to cut through the chaos, a single unlit cigar tucked behind her left ear, and the glint of something dangerous in her eyes. She didn't look like a lawyer. She looked like a storm in human form. The judges presiding over the trial were 3 chief judicial overseers: Chief Justice Koga-Renji, a hardliner known for his staunch pro-hero stance; Associate Judge Mariko Tutsui, a reformist, razor-sharp and dangerous to underestimate; Associate Judge Aidan Stroud, a foreign arbiter from the United Nations Legal Coalition brought in for neutrality. Behind them sat an army of observers, Hero Commission reps, government officials, media, every face a potential enemy. The prosecution came in with 3 heavyweights: Yuta Genzai, head prosecutor, sharp, clean-cut, the golden boy of hero law; Eri Nakamoto, government legal counsel, a cold, efficient bureaucrat with a perfect conviction rate; Tamio Hashikawa, Hero Commission's own, a loudmouth showman sent to be the face of justice. They came prepared with over 10,000 pages of charges, from mass murder to treason to bioterrorism. They were confident. They had the system. They had the country. They didn't have Saori Midoriya. The opening salvo, the courtroom stood silent. The bailiff called the trial to order. Cameras adjusted. Translators synced. And then, from her chair, Saori rose. Slowly. No rush. She walked to the center, green-breathed suit rustling like grass in the wind, briefcase still closed. "Your honors," she said, nodding only slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, the people of Japan, and you, esteemed prosecutors." She gave a wry smirk. "Let's begin." Attack line 1. The 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐵 warrant violation. Saori opened her briefcase and withdrew a single page. Just one. She walked over to the court screen. The projector lit up. A blown-up image of the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐵 ward raid from nearly a decade prior. Smoke, rubble, flames. "This," she said, "was the raid where my client was permanently incapacitated by Tashinori Yagi, also known as All Might." The prosecution straightened. Saori turned, hands behind her back like a teacher in class. "There's just one issue. According to Article 19 of the Japanese Hero Conduct Code and Articles 7 through 11 of the National Rights Accord." She raised her voice. "This warrant." The crowd murmured. Saori tapped the screen again. Up came a dated requisition log, with a red stamp. Denied. See, the Hero Commission had petitioned for a full-scale legal warrant to extract my client. That petition was denied the day before the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐵 raid. And yet, she spread her arms, they went in anyway. Destroyed 3 city blocks. Killed 3 confirmed villains and injured 23 civilians. And my client? She turned sharply to All for One, who sat impassive. Was nearly vaporized in a quirk-enhanced execution. Not arrest. Execution. Chief Justice Koga cleared his throat. "Miss Midoriya, the Commission has consistently stated that exigent circumstances." She didn't flinch. "Exigent circumstances. Your Honor, they had him located for 3 days. They could have waited for court approval, could have issued a real warrant. But they didn't." "What?" She turned, gaze like steel. "Because they weren't trying to bring him in." She walked slowly toward the prosecution. "They were trying to kill him." Attack line 2, All Might's illegal use of force. She pulled up another file, video footage, shaky and blurry. From a civilian drone. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly. The footage played. All Might, golden and blazing, slammed down into 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐸𝐵 with enough force to shatter the street. You could see civilians in the background, running, screaming. You could hear All Might's voice. "This ends now." Then came the punch. The crater. The mushroom cloud. Saori froze the frame. "Ladies and gentlemen, that is not an arrest. That is not a detainment. That is lethal force, deployed without a warrant, without legal authorization, in the middle of a populated district." She raised her voice again. "Imagine if that attack missed by 20 feet. 50. 100. How many more would have died?" 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐵 finally stood. "Your Honor, the footage is inadmissible. The source is unauthorized." Saori raised an eyebrow. "I see. Unauthorized footage of unauthorized violence is too much for the prosecution. Duly noted." The court chuckled. Saori turned back to the screen. "My client has many sins. But in this courtroom, we are not here to judge character. We are here to judge process. And so far, that process looks more like a political lynching than a legal proceeding." Attack line 3. The Commission's tactics. She flipped through another file and tossed down a stack of sealed documents. Classified hero operation logs. Redacted reports. Suppressed testimonies. She glared at Eri Nakamoto. "These are from just one of your Black Ops facilities." "What?" "I have 17 more subpoenas ready to go." Tamio Hashikawa stood up, red-faced. "The defendant is a terrorist. He doesn't deserve due process." Saori stepped forward, voice cold as ice. "And yet he has it." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. She turned back to the judges. "Your Honors, the government will try to paint my client as a monster. A relic. A devil." Her eyes narrowed. "But what you'll find is that monsters are not born. They're built. And while he may have taken countless lives, the people in charge took something far more dangerous." She leaned forward. "They took the rules." And with that, Saori returned to her seat. No dramatics. No raised fists. Just a thin curl of cigar smoke that never quite left her lips. The judges called for recess. The prosecution sat in stunned silence. And Saori sat with her legs crossed, pulling out a lighter. She didn't even have to say it. But the look in her eyes said it all. Round one's over. And I haven't even started. The gavel struck 3 times. The courtroom reconvened. The air was heavier now. The press had gone rabid after Saori Midoriya's opening volley. Social media was ablaze with clips of her calm, almost dismissive dismantling of the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐵 raid's legality. News pundits raged. Civilians whispered. Even pro-hero loyalists were forced to squirm in their seats. But now, the prosecution would call its heroes their icons, their pillars. And Saori, she would break them, one honest question at a time. First witness, Tashinori Yagi / All Might. The courtroom shifted when he entered. Though older, thinner, and more haunted than in his prime, Tashinori Yagi still carried the aura of a symbol. He took the stand with quiet dignity. Swore the oath. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 began his direct. All Might, can you recount the 𝐒𝐮𝐻 confrontation? Yagi did. His voice was steady, measured. He spoke of saving 𝐒𝐵𝐲, the overwhelming threat of all for one, the weight of necessity. The damage, yes, but for the greater good. 𝐒𝐻𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 nodded, satisfied. Nothing further. Saori stood slowly. Her heels echoed on the polished floor as she approached. Mr. Yagi, she said with cool detachment. Do you recall what time the 𝐒𝐮𝐻 raid began? Approximately 5:13 p.m. Good. And when were you authorized to use lethal force? He paused. We deemed the situation too dangerous to hesitate. That wasn't the question. She stepped closer. I asked, when were you authorized, legally, to use lethal force on my client? There was no specific authorization. She nodded. Then let me rephrase. Did you receive a signed government warrant, paper or digital, that authorized the raid, the use of deadly force, or the detainment of my client? He stiffened. Oh. I was told the operation had been approved. By whom? The beat. By the Hero Commission's field liaison. Saori turned to the judges. Your Honors, I have here the Commission's internal approval logs. There is no authorization on file dated before the raid. Nothing digital. Nothing hard copy. No warrant. No oversight. She turned back to All Might. You are, by all accounts, a man of principle. A symbol of justice. But in that moment, at 𝐒𝐮𝐻, were you acting as a hero or as an executioner? 𝐒𝐻𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 objected. Speculation. Withdrawn, Saori said, already turning away. No further questions. Second witness, 𝐒𝐻𝐦𝐴 when the mouse, or whatever species he truly was wheeled in on his polished platform chair, the mood shifted again. Principal 𝐒𝐻𝐴 was cunning, intelligent, strategically terrifying. But today he was not the interrogator. He was the interrogated. Eri Nakamoto took point, walking through 𝐒𝐻𝐴's support of the raid logistics, how you students had been moved, how the raid had a contingency evacuation plan for civilian interference, how coordination with the government had been sufficient. Thank you, Principal. The prosecution rests. Saori rose. 𝐒𝐻𝐴, she said, brushing her braid over her shoulder, you're regarded as the most intelligent being in Japan, yes? I suppose one could say that, he replied with a chuckle. Then I have only a few questions. She set a file on the edge of the witness box. Before the 𝐒𝐮𝐻 raid, did you personally verify that a warrant had been issued? I was told by Commission Logistics that everything was approved. But did you yourself confirm that? No. She opened the file. In fact, not only was the warrant denied, but your cooperation with the Hero Commission violated your own school's bylaws regarding student safety in a Class 5 conflict zone. The smile faded. I was under the impression the Commission had handled. You assumed, she said, voice like a scalpel. Yes. Would you say such assumptions are befitting of someone with your intellect? No. And if one of your students had died, Bakugo Katsuki, for instance, would you have claimed the Commission was at fault? Yes. Then why is it that now, in defense of that very Commission, you excuse your failure to perform due diligence? Silence. She smiled. No further questions. Third witness, NG Todoroki/Endeavor NG entered the court with the weight of his past clinging to him like smoke. His reputation was still rebuilding from scandals past. But he stood tall. The prosecution brought up his tactical precision, his combat coordination, his support during All Might's final fight. He had followed orders. They emphasized orders. Saori leaned against the railing of the witness stand. Number 2 or number 1, depending on your preferred era, you were present for the raid, correct? Yes. Did you ask for a warrant? No. I was informed the operation was active. Were you told who authorized it? A commission directive came down via encrypted channel. And you didn't question it? He scowled. There wasn't time to split legal hairs. All for One was there. Saori pulled out another document. According to this timestamped report from AU, Drone, you were on site 47 minutes before the fight began. Plenty of time, wouldn't you say? He clenched his jaw. No further questions. Fourth witness, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐿 the youngest of the 5, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐿 still bore the nerves of a man caught between generations. He answered questions clearly, proudly, spoke of the civilians he helped extract, the cars he cleared from falling debris, the people he saved. Then came Saori. Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐿, you were tasked with civilian clearance, correct? Yes. And you executed your duties admirably. Several lives saved. Well done. Thank you. Did you have a list of civilian residences within the impact zone? Yes, we received one from a commission courier. Are you aware that list was 2 years out of date? 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐿 blinked. No. Are you aware that 6 families had moved into the zone within that time frame, including a daycare center? I didn't know. She turned back to the judges. Your Honors, this speaks not only to the recklessness of the operation, but the dehumanizing negligence of its planning. This isn't just about my client. This is about the people around him. Fifth witness, Mount Lady Aerie tried to dress Mount Lady's involvement as minimal. Just crowd control. But Saori saw Bill Miss Lady, just Mount Lady, thanks. Saori didn't smile. You threw a semi-truck during the raid. Is that correct? Yeah, but it was empty. It landed on a pharmacy. She handed over a photo. Rubble. BLD civilian casualties. I was told it was a staging site for villains. And who told you that? No one directly. It came over comms. Which comms? I don't know. Just the chatter. So you threw a truck into a building without visual confirmation, based on vague chatter from an unverified source. Mount Lady flushed. It was chaotic. I was doing my best. Your best, Saori said, each word sharp. Resulted in 2 dead, 5 injured. None were villains. She let the silence hang. No further questions. Sixth witness, best 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐿 polished. Collected. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐿 was the prosecution's final hope. They asked him about All for One's power, the threat he posed, the destruction. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐿 answered with poise. Then Saori rose for the final cross of the day. Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐸𝐿, did you ever witness my client kill someone firsthand? No. Did you participate in his capture? I supported the battle efforts, yes. But you were not the arresting party? No. Did you see the warrant? No. So, you did not see him kill. You were not involved in his capture. And you were unaware of the operation's legality. He nodded. Yes. Saori turned to the court. No further questions. She walked back to her seat without fanfare, letting her silence be the final blow. Recess. The judges called for a 1-hour recess. The crowd, once sure the heroes would crush the day, now sat in shaken silence. Reporters murmured. The prosecution shuffled their notes. And Saori lit her cigar at last. From behind the rising veil of smoke, she smiled. Idiots. I haven't even brought out the knives yet. The courtroom was buzzing with anxious murmurs as the judges reconvened after recess. Saori Midoriya reclined with her legs crossed, brushing ash from the tip of her cigar. Her tie hung loose, her top button still undone, casual, confident, untouchable. The prosecution sat opposite her, visibly shaken, redrafting their notes like cornered prey scratching for an escape tunnel. Then came the moment that no one expected this soon. The prosecution calls the defendant, all for one, to the stand. The air froze. Gasps rippled. One of the spectators fainted. A reporter coughed as though choking on the very name. All for one, still cuffed, his face wrapped in reinforced steel and connected to a high-grade respirator, was wheeled into the witness box, skirted by 6 Tartarus guards and 2 heavily armed robots. Though bound, the raw presence of him unsettled the room. He moved like a god who allowed chains only out of amusement. He was seated, sworn in, and the prosecution began. Prosecution's direct examination 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 stepped forward. State your name for the record. I believe you know it well enough, counselor. But for the sake of theatrics, I am, legally, designated as Shigaraki Hisashi. Though the world calls me something far more poetic. Do you admit to being the individual known as All for One? I admit to having held that title. And do you admit to orchestrating numerous crimes against humanity, including murder, illegal quirk manipulation, and attempts to overthrow government authority? All for One chuckled. The sound echoed like a growl through a cathedral. I admit only that the prosecution, like so many others, believes stories. Stories told by men who wear masks of law and justice. But very well, let's proceed with your fable. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 narrowed his eyes. So you deny the charges? I deny the world's simplistic longing to call a complex man evil. Let's discuss 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐽𝐻. Did you resist arrest? I defended myself against unlawful aggression. Against all might. Toshinori, the government's golden boy. He launched the first strike. I retaliated in kind. And what of your followers? Your lieutenants? No. Do you prosecute gods for having worshippers? All for One said with serene venom. I didn't command obedience. I inspired it. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐽𝐻 glared. No further questions. He returned to his table, face pale. As if he'd tried to punch a storm and realized halfway through it was smiling. Defense cross-examination. Saori Midoriya. Saori didn't rise immediately. She sipped a steaming cup of matcha from a crooked ceramic mug, as though the entire trial were just a mildly irritating brunch. Then she stood, heels echoing, and approached the stand like a stage actress taking center frame. She stopped beside All for One's seat. Close. And her voice was low but sharp, a blade coated in silk. Let's begin again, she said. Mr. Shigaraki. You're a scholar, are you not? I consider myself one. A historian. Of both men and power. Have you studied jurisprudence? I have studied the roots of law, Roman, British, Japanese, metahuman legal codes. I've also read the governing constitution of this nation, from cover to footnote. She turned to the judges. Let the record reflect that the defendant has an NTMT understanding of the law. A beat passed. Mr. Shigaraki, when did the Japanese constitution last update the rights of those with meta abilities? The Pro-Hero Act amended Article 17, granting law enforcement powers to licensed individuals with quirks. Did that amendment nullify the basic right to a fair trial? No. In fact, Article 17, Section 4 explicitly reaffirms the right to a public defense, regardless of quirk classification. She turned back to the judges again. I restate, the defendant is fully entitled to a fair trial. Now, Saori faced All for One once more, her voice softening. Why now? Why seek trial after all these years? All for One's voice carried like a sermon. Because I've been silenced. Not just by shackles, but by history itself. My story has never been told by me. Only by the frightened. The wounded. The so-called heroes who label every adversary a villain. And what story would you like to tell, Mr. Shigaraki? His posture remained serene. That once, there was a nation that worshipped power. A nation that created a class of elite vigilantes and called them heroes. That gave them weapons, titles, even legal immunity. And then told the rest of us to smile and comply. And did you comply? I thrived. I built. I created systems for those abandoned. Orphans. The quirkless. The diseased. I built order in the chaos your heroes refused to see. She nodded. Tell me, did you ever experiment on unwilling subjects? No. Every person who came to me did so willingly. Even desperate people make choices. Heroes call them victims. I call them free. And what would you say to the victims who accuse you today? I would say this: their pain is real, but their blame is misplaced. The world punished them long before I arrived. I merely offered them an answer. She stepped aside. Did you kill? I did. Murmurs erupted. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 leapt from his seat. Saori raised a hand, silencing them. Under what context? She asked calmly. When necessary. When law failed. When survival demanded it. As every government has done in every war it has ever waged. So you are not a hero. No. I am something older. Something truer. I am balance. I am consequence. She let the silence breathe. Then she paced, slowly. Final question. Why should this court, this nation even consider your case, your voice, when so many see you as a monster? All for One's face twitched beneath the mask. Because when monsters speak, the world remembers what it buried. Because history is not made by heroes, it is made by those who refuse to be forgotten. The room was dead silent. The judges scribbled. The prosecution stared, stunned. 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐻's hands trembled beneath his table. Reporters wept ink onto paper. And Saori simply bowed. No further questions, Your Honors. She returned to her seat, the echo of her heels a funeral dirge to the prosecution's control. All for One was wheeled away. As the guards opened the door, Saori lit another cigar. Congratulations, she whispered to the smoke. The devil just became a human being in the eyes of the law. The gallery was packed. Word of yesterday's bombshell testimony had exploded across the nation. News outlets had shifted tone from blanket condemnation to uncertainty. Some dared to ask, what if All for One had points buried beneath his atrocities? A question more dangerous than any weapon. Court was in session by 9 a.m. The prosecution arrived early, thinner on confidence than ever. 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐻's lips were a thin, nervous line. The three-judge panel looked wary, as though second-guessing the laws they swore to uphold. And Saori Midoriya. She was smiling. Still in her signature green pantsuit, her hair braided back into a perfect ponytail, a cigar clamped between her teeth and unlit only out of courtesy to courtroom protocol. She stood, flicking ash onto her notes like holy water before a crucifixion. Your Honors, the defense calls President 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 of the Hero Public Safety Commission to the stand. The Queen of Paper Shields, President 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, was a figure of authority, tall, thin, regal in posture, her graying hair swept into a coiled bun. She wore a white power suit with silver cufflinks shaped like stylized wings, the symbol of the HPSC. Her presence brought silence and tension in equal measure. She walked with pride. But she sat like someone bracing for war. After being sworn in, she adjusted her glasses and stared down her nose at Saori. Saori bowed slightly, almost mocking. Good morning, Madam President. Let's skip the theatrics, Counselor. Oh, but theatrics are half the fun, Saori replied, flipping open her leather folder. Now, I'd like to begin with the basics. Please state your full name and title for the record. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴𝐻, President of the Hero Public Safety Commission. And how long have you held that position? 11 years. Which would include the 𝐒𝐻 incident and every major nationwide quirk crackdown in the last decade, yes. Yes. Wonderful. Now then, do you remember authorizing the 𝐒𝐻 raid? 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴𝐻's lips thinned. It was an emergency response coordinated with the Hero Network. Do you remember issuing a warrant for said raid? We didn't have time to process one. The situation was urgent. Saori turned to the judges. Let the record reflect that the head of the HPSC authorized a military-style raid on Japanese soil without a judicial warrant. Now, Madam President, does the HPSC have authority to bypass judicial oversight? In cases where civilian lives are imminently endangered, imminently. Saori interrupted, eyes narrowing. Please tell me, What civilians were in immediate, confirmed danger at 𝐒𝐮𝐻 before the building was leveled? We had intelligence that All for One was harboring weapons and 𝐒𝐻𝐽, and that intelligence was provided by whom? Pro-hero hawks. Who, at the time, was an unlicensed double agent embedded in the League of Villains without public oversight, yes. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 bristled. That operation was compartmentalized for security reasons. Compartmentalized. Fascinating. So compartmentalized that not even the Supreme Court knew. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 didn't answer. Saori smiled faintly. Tell me, Madam President, how many classified quirk modification labs has the HPSC funded in the last decade? I can't comment on classified. Objection, Your Honors, Saori said, not even looking up. The defense has submitted declassified budget reports showing millions of yen allocated to quirk aptitude testing centers in rural districts, none of which have registered public access, none of which ever filed safety compliance forms. She slid a stack of documents onto the evidence cart. Defense Exhibit 12B through 17K. The judges nodded. Admitted. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲's posture shifted ever so slightly. Saori struck again. How many children with dangerous quirks were forcibly removed from their homes and disappeared under your administration? Those records are sealed for national safety. Are they sealed, or are they burned? Saori asked coldly. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 swallowed. Saori walked to the center of the courtroom. Every step a hammer on the coffin of 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲's credibility. You preside over the most powerful regulatory body in the nation. You approve hero licenses, fund agencies, deploy surveillance programs, and coordinate quirk policy. Is that correct? Yes. So tell me, Madam President, who watches you? No answer. Who reviews your decisions? Who approves your covert raids? Who signs off when you brand a teenager a national threat and send elite heroes to execute them in the street? 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 stared, BLD draining from her face. Saori continued, voice calm. Is there a committee? The Parliament? Oh yes, Saori snapped. The same Parliament that RBB stamped your Enhanced Surveillance Authorization Act. The same one that lets you detain unregistered mutants for preventative containment. You rule with a golden pen and a buried sword. She leaned on the rail, eyes gleaming. You called All for One a threat to freedom. But I ask you, what freedom remains when due process is an inconvenience, not a mandate? 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 trembled slightly. I've protected this country. No, Madam President, Saori said. You've protected an illusion of order. And built your empire on fear. You silence nuance, dismiss critics, and now, you stand here and pretend justice was served at 𝐒𝐮𝐻. She turned to the judges. But there was no trial. No arrest. Just an execution attempt by a man with dying lungs and a smile for a sword. Then she faced 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 one last time. If you are the guardian of justice in this country, then justice has rotted from the head down. The room erupted. Some spectators screamed. Some wept. A dozen reporters ran out with their phones. Even the prosecution looked pale. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 didn't respond. She just sat there, stunned. Shaking. The great president of the commission, reduced to a bureaucratic ghost in a paper kingdom aflame. Saori returned to her seat. Your Honors, she said. The defense rests for today. And with that, the day's session was adjourned. But outside, across the nation, the trial had just begun. It was midnight. The city burned, not with fire, but with fury. Crowds packed the streets of Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima, and even Sapporo. What began as scattered protests after Saori's dismantling of the HPSC had evolved into a nationwide uprising. Former pro-hero supporters stood beside activists and dissenters. Students, veterans, even off-duty heroes took to the streets under banners that read, Truth before order. Due process is not optional. Who watches the watchman? And on every major news network, one phrase repeated, Saori Midoriya has formally filed a motion to unseal Tartarus Prison's classified files. The office, 2 a.m. Saori sat alone in her office, the only light coming from the neon glow of her firm's name outside and the muted screen of a wall-mounted TV playing a loop of live protest footage. She didn't watch. She knew the temperature of the country already. She had said it. Her green pantsuit jacket hung off the back of her chair. Sleeves rolled, collar loosened, bare feet on her desk, and a cigar burning low in an ashtray beside a spread of red folders marked Tartarus Operations, Black Seal for Internal Oversight Only Eyes Only. Classified. She had obtained them the way she always did, not legally, but lawfully enough. Let's see how many skeletons they can fit in one concrete tomb, she murmured. Her assistant, a thin man named Reiji, knocked once and stepped in, sweat on his brow. They're filing an injunction to block your motion. Expected, Saori said. Who's backing it? The Minister of Justice. Tartarus Warden. The remnants of the HPSC. Good, she muttered. Let them come. That just means I hit something real. Reiji stepped closer, nervously glancing at the files. Are they as bad as the rumors say? Saori looked up, her eyes like glass knives in the dark. They're worse. The motion. The next morning, Saori stood before the same judicial panel in full media view. The courtroom was surrounded by increased security. Inside, 3 judges, each sleepless, each visibly tense, awaited her new motion. She stepped forward, her folder of evidence tucked under one arm, a single document held aloft in the other. Your Honors, she began, voice slow and heavy with controlled venom. The defense moves to compel the full declassification and public disclosure of Tartarus Prison's internal operations from the last 20 years, including, but not limited to, all prisoner treatment protocols, experimental procedures, punitive actions, and personnel records. Gasps rippled through the gallery. One of the prosecutors slammed a fist on the desk. This is insane. It's justice, Saori said flatly. And if you oppose this, I invite you to explain to the entire nation why public records about state-run incarceration facilities are being treated like nuclear secrets. The lead judge sighed. On what grounds? Saori handed over an envelope. On the grounds that multiple constitutional violations have occurred within Tartarus, including but not limited to, the 8th Amendment equivalent of Japan's Metahuman Rights Code, barring cruel and unusual punishment, the right to bodily autonomy, the right to medical consent, and the right to reproductive freedom. The courtroom froze. She went on. We have already obtained testimony and partial medical reports, illegally redacted by commission oversight, that confirm systematic torture protocols used to force quirk compliance, quirk erasure administered without legal counsel, and in more than 30 cases, forced sterilization of inmates deemed genetically hazardous. Murmurs turned to shouts. The judges banged their gavels. This court will come to order. Saori stepped forward, voice rising, not in volume, but gravity. Your Honors, the state claims all for one is inhumane. Perhaps. But I ask you, can the humane build a place like Tartarus? Can the lawful gut a man's mind, extirpate a woman's WMB, burn memories from the brain and still call themselves just? The judges went pale. She struck one final blow. The defense demands that the people of this nation know who they are. Not the fairy tale of peace and heroes. The truth. And we begin that truth with Tartarus. The fallout within 48 hours, the motion was reluctantly approved under national emergency oversight. The condition, only a limited panel would review the files initially before public release. Saori countered. No, all of it. Or I walk from this case and tell the world who buried the truth. The court folded. By the end of the week, the files began to leak. And what came out broke the country. File excerpts. What the Nation Saw Project Theta SH. 42 failed experiments where inmate quirks were spliced together to try and create organic nomu without full brainwashing. All subjects died in agony. Quirk erasure trials. 96 prisoners subjected to chemical injections derived from an offshoot of Eraserhead's quirk factor. None gave informed consent. 31 were rendered permanently brain-dead. WMB lock procedure, a mandatory implant program initiated for all female inmates under Article 27C, justified by hereditary danger prevention. Removed only post-mortem. Quirk suppression isolation. Sensory deprivation tanks used for mentally unstable inmates, some held in suspension for months. No contact. No clocks. No speech. Audio log 5A screaming protocol. Guards were instructed to ignore distress calls from designated blacklist prisoners unless physical trauma exceeded 70% body damage. Psychiatric notes from Dr. Karasu. AFO remains lucid, but his continued defiance is emblematic of a mental discipline we do not possess. What we did to him would have shattered 10 men. He remains intact. He must never speak publicly. Public reaction the moment the documents hit the net, Japan erupted. The riots grew teeth. The Hero Commission headquarters in Tokyo was stormed and set ablaze by masked demonstrators. Several heroes resigned on live television. Whistleblowers came forward with recordings of HPSC boardroom meetings, detailing how they managed public perception. An inquiry was launched against 3 sitting members of parliament. Foreign powers issued statements expressing shock and condemnation at Japan's metahuman humanitarian disaster. And amidst it all, one image dominated headlines: Saori Midoriya, outside the courthouse, surrounded by angry reporters, smiling as she adjusted her tie and lit a cigar. Final scene: all for one smile that night, in the bowels of Tartarus, all for one sat in his reinforced chair. The lights flickered. Distant sirens howled across the city. One guard, brave or foolish, asked him, "What did you do?" And all for one, smiling beneath his mask, replied, "I didn't do anything." She did. The court was silent. No murmurs from the crowd. No coughing. Not even the creak of a bench. For the first time since the trial began, it was as if the courtroom itself held its breath. Outside, Japan teetered on the edge of transformation or collapse. Inside, history waited to be written. The 3-judge panel presided, exhausted but resolute. The jury, 7 citizens, now under armed guard and full anonymity, watched the courtroom with pale faces and sunken eyes. They had seen too much. And now, all that remained were the final words. The prosecution stood first. The prosecution's closing lead prosecutor Arakawa adjusted his glasses. His once proud posture was hunched with the weight of weeks of losing ground. He walked to the center of the courtroom with a solemn air, like a man trying to carry the corpse of justice back to life. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began quietly, "what we have witnessed in this courtroom is unprecedented." He paused. "I do not deny what has been revealed. I do not stand here to defend torture, sterilization, or unlawful raids. I, too, am ashamed by the truths that have come to light." He looked directly at them now. "But I must remind you, this trial is not about the commission. It is not about Tartarus. It is not about the sins of a flawed system." He pointed to the defendant. "It is about him. That man. All for one. The most dangerous, most cunning, most destructive supervillain in modern history." A few jurors stiffened. "He is not a symbol of rebellion or resistance. He is a predator. A manipulator who spent centuries destroying lives, building criminal empires, and orchestrating acts of mass murder, all for personal power." Arakawa's voice rose. "Are you truly prepared to ignore his crimes because the ones who caught him were imperfect? Will you discard thousands of victims because the system tripped over itself?" He moved toward the jury box, palms open. "Don't be misled. Saori Midoriya is brilliant. She exposed injustice. She tore down institutions. But don't let her distract you from the man at the center of this trial. Don't let the darkness of Tartarus blind you to the abyss that sits in chains before you." His voice softened again. "You are not here to fix the system. You are here to judge a man." He stepped back. "And that man is guilty." Silence. Then, reluctantly, the prosecution returned to their table. Saori Midoriya's final statement: she didn't stand immediately. She let the silence stretch, oppressive and theatrical. Then she rose, tied her braid tighter, straightened her green-breathed suit, and sauntered to the center with her usual air of confidence. Slow, deliberate, like a closing curtain. She lit a cigar. No one dared stop her. She let the smoke rise between her and the jury before speaking. People love stories, Saori began. Heroes and villains. Good and evil. It's so much easier that way. She paced, her heels clicking against the floor. You were told that this trial was about one man. That the crimes of the system don't matter. That all you must do is judge him. She pointed behind her, not at all for one, but at the judges, the gallery, the ceiling. But who made him into what he is? Who gave him the soil to grow? The room to hide? The weapons? The followers? She faced the jury now, voice soft. We've been told that justice is blind. But if that's true, then why does it look away when it's the government holding the WHP? She walked to the prosecution's table, tapping on it with 2 fingers. They want you to pretend he was arrested legally. That he was tried fairly. That everything done to him was justified. She leaned forward. But I proved otherwise. Then she returned to her place in the center and turned her body toward the defendant. Yes, all for one is dangerous. Yes, he has committed monstrous acts. But this trial was never about his guilt. She turned to the jury again. It was about due process. It's about your rights. About what happens when we allow our protectors to become our abusers. She gestured toward the gallery, toward the ghosts of protests and riots still echoing in the streets. If the law only applies to some, then it applies to no one. She paused. Today it's him. Tomorrow it's you. She tapped her chest. I don't like all for one. But I respect the law. And the law says even the worst of us deserve a trial. A real one. Not a staged assassination wrapped in paperwork. She puffed her cigar. This courtroom is the last line between civilization and tyranny. She walked to the defense table and laid a single document on top, all for one's original and signed arrest warrant. Then she turned back to the jury one final time. I don't want you to like him. I don't want you to pity him. I want you to do your job. She tapped the side of her head. Use your brains. Then her heart. And your conscience. She smiled grimly. And then, do what the prosecution never could. Uphold the law. And with that, Saori returned to her seat and exhaled a cloud of smoke like a gunslinger lowering her weapon. Jury instructions. The lead judge stood. You are hereby dismissed to deliberate on the following charges. Treason against the Japanese state, multiple counts of premeditated murder, crimes against humanity, terrorism and conspiracy, abduction and illegal quirk modification. You are instructed to evaluate the admissibility and legality of the evidence, the methods of detainment and interrogation, and whether the rights of the accused were violated to the extent that the charges must be nullified. The gavel slammed. Court adjourned. Jury deliberation begins. The 7 jurors, 3 men, 4 women, were skirted from the chamber. Outside, the nation waited. Screens, radios, live streams all echoed one question. Will Japan choose justice or vengeance? The 5th hour. The courtroom was silent, save for the ticking of an ancient clock on the far wall. 5 hours had passed. Judges sat in tense stillness, robes draped over weary frames. The prosecution whispered among themselves, their nerves frayed, their postures coiled. Saori Midoriya leaned back in her chair with the same arrogant calm she'd carried since the trial began. Her jacket unbuttoned, green tie loosened, cigars slowly burning down in the ashtray beside her. Outside, tens of millions watched live streams in breathless anticipation. Riots had paused. Marches had halted. Entire cities were gripped in suspended animation as the nation awaited its reckoning. Then came the knock. 3 slow raps on the chamber door. The jury had reached a verdict. The bailiff opened the door, revealing 7 masked jurors led by a silent foreman. All wore gloves and full anonymity headwear per court orders, a security measure demanded after 3 previous assassination attempts on alternate jurors. They filed into the room like specters of justice. The lead judge nodded. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? The foreman, a woman with a steady voice and heavy heart, spoke. We have, Your Honor. Then please deliver the verdict. She passed over a sealed envelope. The judge broke it. His eyes flicked over the page, and for a moment, just one moment, the gavel in his hand faltered. But then, with mechanical control, he read aloud, the verdict in the matter of the people versus all for one, regarding the charges of treason, mass murder, terrorism, and other crimes. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty on the grounds that all evidence presented was obtained illegally, that the arrest and detainment were unconstitutional, and that due process was systematically denied by multiple state agencies. Gasps exploded across the room like gunfire. A woman in the gallery fainted. Reporters shouted. One of the prosecutors slammed his chair into the desk. Another began to sob, hunched over his notes. All Might, who had been present in the back row, simply froze, his body locked in place like a statue. Endeavor cursed beneath his breath, gripping the railing so hard it cracked. And at the defense table, Saori Midoriya exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle over her like a silk glove. She reached for her cigar, took a slow drag and whispered, "Checkmate." The aftermath in the chamber, the lead judge struggled to keep order. Silence. This court is still in session. But it was useless. The gallery erupted, some in rage, others in disbelief, still others in awe. All for one, sitting motionless in his chains, let out a slow breath. His face was hidden by his mask, but behind it, something akin to a smile stirred. The judge slammed his gavel. This court acknowledges the verdict. The defendant is to be released from Tartarus pending administrative processing, effective immediately. The gavel slammed one last time. Court is adjourned. Public reaction, the breaking point within minutes. The verdict blanketed the world. All for one, acquitted. Japan's darkest trial ends in shock verdict. Midoriya's masterpiece or democracy's failure. Tokyo erupted. The Ministry of Justice was firebombed. 3 HPSC safe houses were breached. Pro-hero statues were torn down in droves. Online, the hashtags exploded. Hashtag justice was blindfolded, hashtag Saori the breaker, hashtag not guilty not safe, hashtag system on trial across the ocean. Foreign governments condemned the ruling. The United Nations announced an emergency summit. Villains celebrated. Vigilantes swore vengeance. Underground networks lit up. And at the center of it all stood one woman. Saori Midoriya. The eye of the storm, her office was flooded with media requests, death threats, and political offers. She ignored them all. In her private lounge, Saori poured herself a glass of 18-year-old whiskey and lit another cigar. Reiji, her assistant, paced nervously nearby. "They're saying the government's going to collapse," he muttered. Saori exhaled. "But they should." He looked at her, sweating. "You let all for one walk free." "No," Saori corrected. "The system did. I just held up the mirror." Reiji swallowed. "What happens now?" She turned toward the towering window overlooking the city, now glowing red from riots and firelight. "Now," Saori whispered, "now comes the reckoning." Final scene. All for one's release under heavy guard, skirted by a dozen armored vehicles and surrounded by news drones. All for one was walked out of Tartarus prison, not as a prisoner, but as a man vindicated by law. He wore no restraints. His breathing was steady. As the steel doors of the most infamous prison in the world closed behind him, the crowd outside surged against the fences. Some screamed. Some wept. Others bowed. But all for one only looked forward. Waiting for him was Saori. Green pantsuit. Loosened tie. Cigar in hand. They exchanged no words. Only a nod. And together, they walked into the smoke-covered light of a world forever changed. Muzutafu Police Precinct, Detention Block 3. The cold buzz of fluorescent lights flickered across cracked tiles and rust-stained walls. A scent of mildew, BLD, and antiseptic lingered in the air like a ghost with unfinished business. In Cell 12A sat a man whose name once sent chills through Japan's heroes. Chained by both arms and legs, dressed in an orange jumpsuit far too clean for his nature, the hero killer stared at the muted TV screen in the corridor across from his cell. He had been there for 2 days. 2 days since the special response team cornered him in a sewer beneath Osaka. 2 days since Kamui Woods slammed him into concrete. 2 days since he'd been dragged back to civilization in cuffs made for monsters. Yet his eyes were not dulled. his posture not defeated. And now, his mind was racing. The TV commercial on the screen, as if mocking his senses, the bold green suit of Saori Midoriya strolled across a stylized courtroom, all dramatic lighting and swelling orchestral tones. The slogan flared in golden letters behind her like divine graffiti. Innocent until proven broke. Justice for all. Even you. Better call Saori. She smiled into the camera, loosening her tie and lighting a cigar. So you've been arrested. Maybe you challenged a little corruption, blew up a shady hero agency, or just set off the wrong commission member. Don't sweat it. They've got the guns. I've got the law. Call my office. If you've got a cause, or a case, I've got the claws. The ad cut to a montage of real headlines, all for one walks. Tartarus exposed, Midoriya's legal nuke, hero society in chaos. A final tagline echoed as the screen faded to green. The law doesn't pick sides. It just needs someone crazy enough to use it. The number flashed on screen. And for the first time since his recapture, Stain smiled. The desk officer was skeptical. Are you serious? He muttered, holding the receiver. Stain's voice was calm but firm. I want her. You want Saori Midoriya to be your defense attorney. Stain leaned forward in his chains. She's the only one who doesn't pretend this system is just. The officer hesitated. You do realize that she got all for one acquitted? The officer blinked. And that doesn't concern you. Stain's smile widened, slow and sharp like the drawing of a knife. No. It proves she knows how to dismantle false idols. Later that night, Saori's office. Saori Midoriya sat behind her desk, green suit perfectly tailored, her tie undone and shirt opened just enough to defy every HR manual ever written. She puffed her cigar as her assistant, Reiji, passed her a sleek file stamped urgent. Hero killer case. She scanned it, eyebrows rising just slightly at the name. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, she muttered. Stain. She leaned back and tapped ash into a brass tray shaped like Lady Justice's 𝐵LNDFLD. Well, that's nostalgic. Reiji raised an eyebrow. You defended villains. War criminals. Even the guy whose entire career was murder for hire. But Stain. You sure? Saori tilted her head, amused. He's not like the others. He's crazy. No, she corrected, he's ideological. That makes him more dangerous and more useful. She picked up her phone and dialed the precinct. This is Saori Midoriya. Tell your warden I'll be there by morning. The next day, Mizudafu precinct, the guards looked uneasy as Saori strolled in, flanked by 3 paralegals and 2 independent observers. She carried a briefcase, a cup of coffee, and a knowing smirk. They led her down to the secured section. Cell 12A, said the officer. He hasn't stopped pacing since he called you. Saori raised an eyebrow. I do have that effect. They opened the door. Inside, Stain stood like a statue, shoulders straight, hair wild, muscles coiled beneath his jumpsuit. His eyes locked on hers immediately. Ms. Midoriya, he said. Mr. 𝐒𝐻𝐾𝐲, she replied, stepping in. The door closed behind her with a heavy click. The interview, they sat across from one another. No chains, no guards, no cameras. Saori had negotiated full privacy as a condition for representation. Stain broke the silence first. Why did you take the call? She smirked. Why did you make the call? Because the system you tore down still pretends it's whole. And I want to finish what I started. Saori exhaled a puff of smoke. You're charged with 5 new counts of attempted murder. Multiple aggravated assaults. Possession of illegal blades. And 2 counts of public incitement. That's just from this arrest. Stain showed no remorse. All of it was against fakes. Frauds in costumes who serve money, not justice. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. So what's the goal, Stain? You want to walk free? You want to justify your murders? No. He held her gaze like a weapon. I want a trial. That caught her off guard. A public one, he continued. Where I speak my truth. Where I force the public to confront what heroes have become. Saori's lips curled. You want a stage? I want to burn the house down, with the law as the match. Saori leaned back, tapping ash. Then we have a deal. She stood and extended her hand. I'll make sure they give you your trial. The whole circus. He gripped it with iron strength. But we do it my way, she added. Legal channels. Media pressure. Public leverage. I don't lose in court. Stain grinned. Then let's make Japan listen. Final scene. National shockwaves news anchors interrupted regular programming within hours. Breaking. Saori Midoriya to represent hero killer Stain in court. Stain's defense team hints at systemic hero corruption, argument, justice or madness. Public divided over Midoriya's new client. Hero agencies went into panic. The HPSC scrambled to block media coverage. And in a dark office far from the spotlight, all for one, unbound, legally free, watched the news unfold with a hollow chuckle. Perfect, he whispered. Saori's law office. 3 days later, Saori Midoriya leaned over the war table at the center of her private conference room. A large digital board glowed before her, filled with color-coded folders, legal documents, photos of witnesses, and interconnected threads like a spiderweb spun by a genius lawyer with an axe to grind. Across the table, her team sat in focused silence. Reiji, her overworked assistant, Naomi, her private investigator, Hiro, her forensic specialist, and 2 junior attorneys brought on. Retainer after the all-for-one trial. The atmosphere was electric. Saori's eyes, sharp behind her smoky lashes, danced across the room as she barked orders like a general preparing for war. Phase 1. Tear opened the narrative. Saori jabbed a pen at a large screen where headlines about Stain's past attacks flashed alongside photos of pro-heroes covered in their own BLD. First, we shatter the image, she said. The prosecution will paint Stain as an irredeemable monster. But that image only works if we let them frame the debate. We're going to make this trial about why he did what he did, and what he uncovered in the process. She snapped her fingers. Naomi leaned forward. I've got lists of heroes he targeted. Want to guess how many of them were investigated for corruption after their fights with Stain? How many? Asked Reiji. 9 out of 15, Naomi replied, smirking. 3 had entire agencies dissolved within a year. 2 were caught embezzling, 1 was tied to quirk trafficking. The rest retired under mental health leave, while their records were sealed. Saori grinned like a shark who smelled beef. Get me sealed records. Any leaks? We'll force the court to admit them into evidence under Rule 217, justifiable cause for sealed document unsealing. Use my Tartarus precedent if you have to. Already drafting the motions, Hiro said. Phase 2, expert testimony. Saori turned to a set of color-coded folders labeled experts. We'll need forensic psychiatrists, she muttered. Ones who won't roll over for the prosecution. I want testimony about moral injury, combat fatigue, and ethical disillusionment. Reiji frowned. You're going to argue that Stain was psychologically justified. Saori tapped the screen and pulled up an expert dossier. No. I'm going to argue that his mindset was the inevitable result of the society they built. He was a canary in the coal mine, screaming while the air turned toxic. She paused. Get me Dr. Setsuna Hoshino. She diagnosed over 24 heroes with post-career moral trauma. And the American professor, Pierce. He wrote Vigilantism and Virtue, Ethics in Postmodern Law Enforcement. I'll get their rates, Naomi said. Phase 3, Eyewitnesses and the Victims. Stain doesn't want to deny what he did, Saori said. That would insult him. But he wants the trial to mean something. She tapped her pen against a list of victims and survivors. I need those who survived him and lived to question the system after. I want them on the stand. Even if they hate him, even if they beg for his conviction. Their doubt is the real weapon. Do you think anyone will agree? Heroist. Saori smiled. Some already did. One of them is the wife of pro-hero Gail Hammer, one of Stain's early victims. She quit her agency, disappeared for years. Tell me. Naomi nodded. She's in Okinawa now. Raising 2 kids. Says she'll speak, but only if she can do it off camera. Done. That's our star civilian witness. She turned to the bottom of the list. And will subpoena retired pro-hero gunhead. He witnessed one of Stain's captures firsthand, and he walked away from his job within months. He'll try to resist, but if I show him the Kamino warrant debacle and Tartarus files, he'll crack. Won't that make him hostile? Rage asked. I'm counting on it, Saori said, teeth flashing. Phase 4, Strategic Subpoenas. Time to make the prosecution panic, Saori muttered as she scrolled through her MSTR list of subpoenas. Hero Public Safety Commission communications during the original Manhunt Pro-Hero files targeted by Stain, unredacted Stain incident reports, cross-agency hospital files, injuries sustained by Pro-Heroes, confidential HPSC internal documents from 7 months before and after Stain's arrest. She tapped her pen. We're going to argue that Stain was not a threat to society, but a mirror. The state didn't silence him because he was dangerous, but because he was right. That's our theme. She locked eyes with each member of the team. You don't silence a man who kills for fun. You hunt him. But you erase a man who threatens your narrative. Media offensive, the trial before the trial, Reiji, set up the press campaign. What's the message? That this isn't the people versus Stain, Saori said. It's Stain versus the system. Every radio spot, every podcast guest appearance, every article we seed in underground blogs. We remind people, this trial isn't about murder, it's about truth. And if the HPSC tries to censor, they already look like tyrants. We'll dare them to make it worse. Late that night the office dimmed, but Saori remained. She stared at a large corkboard-style display titled, The Stain Defense Strategy Bleed the Truth. It was a mad web of law, philosophy, and weaponized legality. A chaotic masterpiece. She poured herself a shot of whiskey and lit another cigar. Behind her, the city burned with confusion, fury, and fear, still recovering from All for One's release. And now another storm was building. One not of violence or villainy, but of justice. Her kind of justice. Halfway into her preparations, Saori discovers that the prosecutor for Stain's case is a new guy. This detail makes Saori cackle like a madwoman, so she is in a bit of a conundrum of how she should play this. She could either A. Use her body to suck the prosecutor into throwing the case because he is most likely a virgin, or B. Just do it the normal way. You know what, F it, got nothing better to do. Saori muttered to herself as she suches out her normal white panties for a black thong and her plain BR for a black lace BR that really shows off her melons. 38DD Prosecutor Office, Mizudafu Courthouse, 9:23 p.m. The corridors were quiet now. Only the buzz of dying fluorescent lights and the far-off echo of a cleaning bot filled the sterile air. The city's chaos, riots, protests, conspiracy-fueled podcasts, faded beyond the thick walls of the legal fortress known as Mizudafu's district court. Prosecutor Hirdo Tsukigane sat hunched over his desk, sleeves rolled up, collar askew, eyes bloodshot from sifting through a legal war zone's worth of motions, requests, and subpoena challenges. The Stain trial was his first major assignment. He was barely fresh-faced, smart, sincere, but untested. And Saori Midoriya smelled BLD. 25 p.m. Saori arrives. The door opened with a smooth creak. Haruto looked up and blinked in surprise. Standing before him in a tailored forest green trench coat and heels was the devil herself. Working late? Saori asked, her voice velvet-dipped sarcasm. A cigar smoldered between her fingers, its smoke trailing lazily upward like her intentions. Haruto stiffened, then tried to stand. Ms. Midoriya, Saori, she corrected with a smile. We're going to be spending a lot of time together, Haruto. No need for formality. I'm not your senior, unless you want me to be. He flushed. Not quite used to wolves in woman-shaped skin. 27 p.m. The dance begins. She sat in front of him without waiting for an invitation, crossing one leg over the other with slow precision. The trench coat slipped slightly, revealing the edge of her unbuttoned blouse and the teasing swell of her cleavage. Her loosened tie hung just above it like a stage curtain. Your office is cute, she murmured. Almost like they gave you this case to break you. Haruto tensed. I was chosen because I have a clean record. No bias. Oh, sweetheart, Saori purred, tapping her cigar into a nearby mug. You were chosen because they think I'll walk circles around you, and when I do they'll blame you instead of their own incompetence. He said nothing. But you're smarter than they realize, she continued. I can tell. I've read your thesis. Justice as ideal versus tool of the state. For Nietzschean. CC even. You read that. I devour my prey, she said, flashing teeth through a lipstick-red grin. I like to know what kind of man I'm eating alive. Haruto cleared his throat. Is there a reason you came here? Oh, there's a few, she said, leaning forward. But only one you'll remember. 32 p.m. She offers a drink. Saori reached into her coat and placed a small silver flask on the desk between them. Drink with me. He hesitated. Isn't this unorthodox? You think anything about this trial is orthodox, she said, laughing softly. Come on, Haruto. One drink. For courage. For clarity. For negotiation. He reached for the flask. She smiled as he drank. Attaboy. 40 p.m. They talk shop. Tell me something, she said, legs still elegantly crossed. Why did you take this case? Really? He exhaled. Because the public deserves closure. Because villains don't get to rewrite the narrative. Because I believe in law, true law. Not corrupted policy. Saori's smile deepened. You're adorable, she said. Still believing in truth like it's a thing that exists. You're the kind of man who says, the system can be fixed. It can. She leaned forward, breath warm against his ear. I want to see if you'll still say that after this trial tears your soul in half. 50 p.m., the hotel key. He looked at her, now visibly shaken, but not from fear. From something else. A tension that simmered between them. She reached into her coat again and slid a key card across the desk. A trial's like Haruto, she whispered. It's not about demps. It's about rhythm. Control. Knowing when to press and when to retreat. He stared at the key. What are you playing at? I'm not playing, she said, standing up. I'm inviting. She leaned down, her lips ghosting his ear. I booked room 707 at the Westward Hotel. 20 minutes from here. No press. No prying eyes. Chemistry. She pulled away, eyes sharp but sultry. I want to see what you're made of. Both in and out of court. 07 p.m. Hotel lobby. Rain tapped against the windows as Haruto stepped into the lobby of the Westward Hotel, coat damp and nerves electric. He paused by the elevator. He didn't know why he came. Curiosity. Ego. Desperation. Or maybe he wanted to understand her before she crushed him in court. The elevator dinged. He stepped inside. 10 p.m., room 707. The door opened slowly. She stood by the window, framed by the city lights, coat off, blouse loosened, hair now cascading from her braid like a predator shedding its last restraint. No words passed. Only eyes met. She beckoned with a finger. And the door clicked shut behind him. Saori smiled like a canary as Haruto entered the hotel room. So big boy, are you prepared to swim with a shark? Saori said with a stuck smile that made Haruto weak in the knees. Why? Yes, Haruto squeaked out as Saori slowly and teasingly took off the blazer of her emerald green pantsuit, letting Haruto get a glimpse of her generous bust. Good boy, Saori praises as she sets down her blazer on a chair. I hope he is at least big, Saori thought hopefully. Then without any preamble Saori unbuttoned her dress shirt and tosses it onto the chair, letting Haruto see her black lace-clad 38D cup. My god. They're huge. Haruto muttered as he finally striped down to his underwear. I sure hope they're up to your standards, Saori said as she with barely any effort as she uncapped her BR, letting it fall to the floor. Letting Haruto see her perky nipples and the pale skin of her melons. Haruto practically pounces onto Saori as he takes one of her nipples into his mouth and suckles on it. Saori let out a soft as she grabs the back of his head to make him SCK harder, whilst with her other hand it goes down his underwear to slide him off. My god, I thought he'd at least be 6 inches, not barely 4. Saori thought with a bit of disappointment. Haruto ravenously is on Saori's NPL like it was the sweetest thing he has ever tasted, which it was because he was a virgin. He then gasped as Saori stroked him to his sinks. Goddammit, he's a quick shot too. Here I thought he might last at least 10 minutes. Not barely 2 minutes, Saori thought angrily, but on her face was still a stuck smile. Enjoy that, sweetie, Saori cooed into Haruto's ear as she pulled her hand out of his underwear and up to her mouth so she could lick his seed off of her hand. At least it doesn't taste bad. I think it's time for round 2, huh? Saori said as she unbuttoned her breathes and let them drop to her ankles, revealing her black thong. Haruto practically tore off his underwear in his haste, revealing his barely 4-inch-long pee-pee that was rock hard again. Saori winked at Haruto as she turned around and teasingly pulled her thong down her long, slender legs, whilst swaying her hips back and forth, making her butt jiggle. Haruto gave a death stare at Saori's butt as she pulled off her thong as Saori walked towards the bed. Much to her surprise, Haruto bent her over and onto the bed and moved inside her. Saori softly as Haruto moved into her like an animal in heat. Much to her disappointment, he came quickly, but the part that made her hopeful was that he was still hard and he hadn't pulled out, so he went back to moving into her like an animal in heat. 40 minutes later, Haruto groaned as he reached his final 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐸𝐵 of the night, dumping his seed into Saori. He is breathing hard as his ball empty inside her. Saori, much to her enjoyment, just barely reached her own 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐸. Thought she wasn't looking forward to cleaning up all of Haruto's seed that was inside her. Thank God I got a hold of his medical file, she thought happily as she thought back to that file she had to bribe a couple of doctors for. I'm so glad he is completely infertile, otherwise I might have gotten pregnant. Saori kissed Haruto on the cheek as he pulled out of her. I hoped you enjoyed that, she said as she rolled over to give Haruto a spot on the bed. I enjoyed that a lot. For my first time. Haruto admitted with a bit of reluctance in his voice. Really, that was your first time? I'd have thought with how good you were doing that you had some experience, she said, but was lying through her teeth as she patted the spot on the bed next to her. Haruto laid down on the bed next to Saori and scooted closer so his chest was against her melons. I hope we can do that again. We can, but I got a condition for a repeat performance, she said, knowing full well that she has him wrapped around her finger. And what would that be? Haruto said with a raised eyebrow as his hands snaked around to grab Saori's butt. Throw the stain case, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you put it in my butt next time. And this worked hook, line, and sinker. All right, you got a deal. Saori was internally smiling like a sociopath as he agreed without any resistance. Good boy, now it's time to sleep. Westward Hotel. Room 707. 6:03 am. The room was bathed in the dim gray of pre-dawn light, filtered through sheer curtains fluttering slightly in the breeze from the cracked window. The city still slept, or at least pretended to. Down below, the streets of Mizutofu were hushed, caught in that fragile lull before morning traffic and midday headlines resumed their endless churn. Saori Midoriya stirred awake, her sharp emerald eyes fluttering open with practiced awareness. There was no grogginess, no haze of regret or sentiment, only the steady recalibration of a mind already moving 3 steps ahead of the world. She lay in the hotel bed for exactly 7 seconds, just long enough to register the warmth of the man beside her, Prosecutor Haruto Tsukigane, still asleep and half-draped in the white sheets they had thoroughly tangled the night before. His features were softened in slumber. Vulnerable. He looked younger like this. Less like the state's rising star and more like a man still uncertain of what game he'd truly stepped into. Saori exhaled silently, then pushed the sheets away from her bare form and sat up. 06 Saori dresses. The predator rebuilds her armor. Saori stood, unabashed in her endoi as she walked toward the chair where her green pantsuit lay draped in careless abandon, the same way it had been shed the night before with theatrical flair. She stretched, long and slow, spine arching like a cat recovering from a satisfying hunt. There was no rush, but every movement was efficient, deliberate. Her body bore the confidence of a woman who always got what she wanted, and the discipline of someone who knew how to weaponize it. She dressed piece by piece, starting with black lace undergarments from her satchel, fresh, of course. Then the soft silk of her button-up blouse, the green jacket with the tailored shoulders, and finally her signature tie, left loosely knotted, top 2 buttons undone as always. Her braided ponytail was remade in the mirror with a few expert flicks of her fingers. No makeup was reapplied, she didn't need it. Her poise alone radiated depth. She looked once in the mirror and offered herself a faint, self-assured smirk. Game face, restored. 12 a.m. The note and the message back at the hotel desk, Saori scribbled something quickly on the notepad provided by the hotel. Her handwriting was elegant, confident, and slanted slightly to the right, a calligrapher's weapon rather than a lover's caress. She tore off the page and set it gently on the nightstand beside Haruto's slumbering form. Then, without hesitation, she took a thick wad of yen from her clutch, placed it under the note, and weighed it down with the hotel's room key. A cherry on top. The note read, "Good performance. We'll see if you last longer in court. S.M. 15 a.m. Saori leaves. The queen returns to her court. Saori stepped out of room 707 and closed the door behind her without a sound. The hallway was still empty, still hushed like a chapel after midnight. She descended into the lobby as the first tendrils of sunlight began to pierce the Mizudafu skyline. In the back seat of her waiting car, she lit a cigar. Her driver didn't speak. He knew better. As the engine purred to life, Saori rolled down the window and let the smoke trail into the wind. She wasn't thinking about Haruto. Not directly. What mattered now was momentum. And Haruto, whether he realized it or not, was just one more rook she'd moved to the center of the board. The trial of Stain was approaching. The city was still bleeding from the all-for-one acquittal. And the Hero Commission was shaking, quietly, behind closed doors. It was the perfect storm. And Saori Midoriya, cigarette in hand, suit freshly pressed, and soul unwavering, was sailing right into its heart. Mizudafu Superior Court, Courtroom 4A. 2 weeks later, 9:01 a.m. It was the trial everyone had dreaded. If the all-for-one circus had cracked the legal dam, State versus Stain was the tidal wave threatening to wash away what little public trust remained in the justice system. Hundreds gathered outside the courthouse. Protesters clashed with supporters, some waving signs that read, "The hero killer was right," others chanting villain apologists to hell. Police cordons strained under the pressure. News drones hovered like vultures above a corpse not yet cold. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Every seat was filled, press, legal observers, international lawyers, and a few silent, stone-faced pro-heroes. They'd come not out of duty, but dread. The accused sat still and unblinking, eyes glinting beneath his shackles. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, the hero killer. His blade had not tasted BLD in years, but the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. At the defense table sat Saori Midoriya, calm, smug, confident in the way only someone who'd already committed war crimes against the prosecution's morale could be. Her emerald eyes drifted lazily to the other side. And there he was. Haruto 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. Clean-shaven. Tie straight. Files neat. And yet, his aura screamed guilt. They'd slept together, at least. But what Saori had done was far more strategic. She'd poisoned his sense of objectivity. Subtly. Quietly. Irrevocably. She could see it in his hands, the way he didn't touch his notes. The way he didn't meet her gaze. He was going to throw the case. Saori didn't care. She'd already built her artillery. This was a show for the world. And the opening act was hers. But she knew what she was going to do to silence Haruto when she inevitably didn't sleep with him again. 03 m. Judge Morita takes the bench, all rise. Everyone stood. Judge Hiroshi Morita, aged but sharp, with steely eyes behind rimless glasses, took his seat and gave the room a once-over. His presence demanded order, but the energy remained taut, like a violin string pulled past breaking. "You may be seated." He adjusted his robes. State versus Akaguro, docket number 2287 Q. Charges, 17 counts of first-degree attempted murder, 6 counts of aggravated assault, 11 counts of vigilantism under Hero Regulation statutes, and 3 violations of Article 47B, quirk misuse leading to permanent harm. He turned to the prosecution bench. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, are you ready to proceed?" Haruto stood with a slight tremble. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Morita turned to Saori. "Ms. Midoriya." Saori smiled like the Queen of Spades in a losing gambler's final hand. "Oh, more than ready, Your Honor." 10 a.m. Opening statements begin. Haruto stood first. His voice was clear, rehearsed, but bloodless. The prosecution intends to show, beyond reasonable doubt, that 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴𝐾𝐽 is a violent extremist. His actions were not born of justice. but of delusion, arrogance, and cruelty. No matter what beliefs he cloaked himself in, the trail of blood he left behind was illegal and immoral. He is not a savior. He is a serial killer. He paused. And the law will treat him as such. There was polite, controlled silence. He sat. Saori stood next, unfolding herself from the chair like a slow explosion. She straightened her tie, buttoned one button, then strolled to the center with a predator's grace. She let silence sit for a moment. Then, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, voice husky and deliberate. "Do you believe in heroes?" A murmur. She continued. "Because Stain did." She let that linger. "You will hear how the government failed to prosecute pro-heroes who abused their positions. You'll hear how certain heroes took bribes, looked the other way, turned a blind eye to suffering. You will hear how Stain, in his flawed and brutal way, tried to correct what the system wouldn't." She began to pace. "I'm not here to tell you Stain is a saint. He's not. He is a weapon. But the question you must ask yourself is, who made the weapon, and why was he needed in the first place?" She raised a finger. "You will see documents that expose the HPSC ignoring dozens of misconduct reports. You'll see footage of heroes committing property damage, extorting civilians, ignoring emergencies for sponsor obligations. And when the prosecution tries to show you bloodied crime scene photos, I want you to ask yourself, where were the heroes before that blood was spilled?" She turned back to the jury box. "This trial is not about villainy. It's about accountability. And I'm going to prove, without a doubt, that this government, these institutions, and even some of your favorite heroes made the hero killer necessary." She returned to her seat slowly, drawing every eye as she passed. Judge Morita cleared his throat. "The prosecution may call its first witness." 30 a.m., tensions mount as Haruto fumbled his first witness. An officer whose body cam footage was mysteriously incomplete. Saori leaned close to Stain. "You feel it, don't you?" Stain didn't speak, but his eyes flicked toward her, then the jury. He nodded once. Control was shifting. The game was on. And Saori Midoriya had just cut the opening ribbon with a guillotine. Mizudafu Superior Court, Courtroom 4A, Day 2 of Trial, 9:48 am. The court was already electric from yesterday's opening statements. Now it was on fire. Prosecutor Haruto Tsukigane sat rigid at his bench, his confidence bleeding out minute by minute like a gut shot. He had no idea what was coming next. Not truly. Not until Saori Midoriya stood up, flipped open a thick manila folder, and dropped the first true bombshell of the trial. The hero killer had not merely murdered. He had cleansed. 50 a.m. Exhibit A. Captain Celebrity Saori strode up to the evidence screen, her green pantsuit immaculate, her loosened tie like a banner for courtroom rebellion. Her eyes gleamed like twin blades. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "I request permission to present newly admitted evidence under Article 11F, subsection 3, regarding character testimony of alleged victims." Judge Morita raised an eyebrow. "Granted." A few murmurs. Haruto swallowed hard. The screen lit up behind Saori. The face that appeared was familiar. Captain Celebrity. Blonde. Smiling with perfect Hollywood teeth. A pro-hero imported from America with international acclaim, once hailed as a paragon of charisma. Until he met Stain's blade. "Let's talk about Lawrence Reynolds, shall we?" Saori said, pacing slowly before the jury. "Known to the public as Captain Celebrity. Killed by my client 2 years ago in an alley in Sapporo. The media reported it as unprovoked." She turned to the screen. It changed to an aerial shot, grainy but clear. It was a surveillance drone's footage, time-stamped and marked as sealed by the HPSC. It showed police breaking into the celebrity hero's Hokkaido estate. They never aired this footage. The next clip showed interior body cam footage, shaky but horrifying. Rows of steel basement doors. Bucks. Screams. 6 girls, Saori said softly. Ages 9 to found in the basement of this hero's summer retreat. Malnourished. Some with injuries consistent with prolonged SXL abuse. Captain Celebrity kept them there for years, Two of them were PR'd in T when they were freed. Gasps echoed in the room. One juror turned pale. Saori turned back to the jury, voice like ice. The HPSC knew. They covered it up. The local police tried to bury the evidence. You know who didn't look the other way? She jabbed a thumb toward the defense table. Him. Stain sat unmoving, but the fire in his eyes burned brighter. And before anyone claims fabrication, she added, lifting a thick file, we have corroborating witness statements, DNA evidence, and a confession from the head of the local precinct, obtained under immunity. Haruto didn't object. Couldn't. His mouth opened once, then closed. He looked down. Checkmate, and the game had just begun. 12 a.m., Exhibit B through question the fallen Saori wasn't finished. Oh, but we're just warming up. Slide after slide lit up the screen. Not of martyrs, but of monsters. Exhibit B, Houndbreaker, killed in Fukuoka. Post-mortem revealed hidden bank accounts tied to multiple gang syndicates and a history of illegal drag distribution via under-the-table hero clinics. Exhibit D, Iron Shade, killed in Kyoto, was under secret HPSC investigation for assisting in human trafficking rings connected to overseas villain groups. Exhibit H, Giga Lass, once considered a media darling, investigated for extortion, arson for hire, and the cover-up of a civilian death in a rescue that was never reported. Exhibit K through M, 3 regional heroes in the Kansai area, accused by their own sidekicks, under oath, of extorting small businesses for protection fees. All 3 resigned for personal reasons days before their scheduled internal review, and just hours before Stain's blade found them. Each name was another nail in the coffin. Each photo, another torch thrown onto the pyre of heroism's illusion. 08 a.m., the jury watches the lie unravel. Saori's voice never raised. It didn't need to. It was like watching someone peel off a mask you thought was real skin, only to find rot and mold underneath. The prosecution wants you to see a murderer, she told the jury, arms spread wide as if inviting them to draw their own sword. But I see a man who walked into a burning house, one our government insisted was perfectly safe, and began pulling corpses from the walls. He is not guilty of murder. He is guilty of truth. She pointed back at Haruto. And truth terrifies them. 25 a.m., the courtroom reacts. The gallery was a boiling cauldron of whispers, outrage, and stunned disbelief. Cameras outside fed clips to global audiences. Already, social media was catching fire. The hashtag Stain was right had returned with fury. The judge slammed his gavel once. Order in the court. He turned to Haruto. Prosecution. You may respond. But Haruto looked like a man watching his own burial. He stood, walked to the podium, opened his mouth, and closed it. He had nothing. No counter-evidence. No rebuttals. Not even a deflection. Saori had ripped out the foundation of their narrative. 30 a.m., whispered Thunder. Stain leaned towards Saori slightly, voice low and raspy. You chose wisely. Saori didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on the jury. I didn't choose anything, she said. I just know where the bodies are buried. Day 3, 9 a.m. Yuzurifu Superior Court, Courtroom 4A. By the 3rd day of State vs. Stain, the courtroom no longer smelled of cheap pine-scented polish or the stale leather of age-old jurisprudence. It reeked of fear. Public opinion had gone nuclear after yesterday's expose. Protesters now circled the courthouse in waves. The Hero Public Safety Commission was already in emergency meetings with the Ministry of Order. And despite Judge Morita's best attempts to preserve decorum, dozens of courtroom seats were now occupied by national-level oversight agents and international observers. But Saori Midoriya wasn't concerned with politics. Today, her war was with the past. 12 m. Your Honor, the defense calls Tenya Ida to the stand. Tenya Ida entered the courtroom in a neatly pressed suit, tall and clean-cut, glasses reflecting the soft overhead lighting. Still the image of earnestness. But beneath the surface, he looked tired. Not physically. Morally. After the oath, Saori approached with her usual swagger, though her voice held a carefully measured tone, less venom than usual. Good morning, Mr. Ida, she said. Good morning, counselor. Do you recall the date of June 22nd, 20XX? He blinked, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Yes. It's the night we encountered Stain, in Hosu. Saori nodded, pulling a tablet from her folder and tapping it. A still image displayed on the courtroom monitor, the infamous alleyway, BLD stained, littered with debris, fire flickering in the background. You, along with my brother, Saori Midoriya, and Shoto Todoroki, were involved in the capture of Stain, correct? Yes. Were you licensed pro heroes at the time? No. We were first years at WhatIf, on our internships. Which means you had provisional licenses at best, if even that. Correct. Saori stepped aside, slow and surgical. So you, a 15-year-old student without full licensing or legal authority, engaged a known fugitive in armed combat, yes. Tenya hesitated. I acted out of personal motivation. Stain he'd crippled my brother. Please answer the question. Yes. Did you contact the local authorities before engaging? No. Did you inform your supervising pro hero? No. Did you attempt negotiation? No. You were armed with your quirk? Yes. She let the silence linger. So, you conducted a vigilante action. One that resulted in your suspect's brutal incapacitation, multiple stab wounds, and a collapsed lung. Tenya's face twisted in guilt. I know what I did was wrong. Saori stepped closer, voice calm. Did the HPSC or you punish you for this? No. They promoted you. You graduated. You're now an active, licensed pro hero. Yes. She folded her arms. Do you believe, Mr. Ida, that the law should apply equally to everyone? I do. Saori leaned in. Her words were sharp now. Then why should Stain be condemned for taking action outside the law, when you, a minor, were celebrated for doing the same thing? Tenya flinched. I don't know. 40 a.m. The defense calls Shoto Todoroki. Shoto took the stand with his usual blankness, but his mismatched eyes flicked once to the gallery, to Endeavor, sitting in silent tension. He took his oath. Saturday. Saori approached him with a smile that wasn't quite friendly. Mr. Todoroki, you were present during the Hosu incident, correct? Yes. You assisted in capturing Stain. Yes. Also 15. Yes. You froze half the street during the altercation. I did. Were there civilians nearby? Yes. Were you aware of the structural damage caused by flash freezing an urban block? I didn't consider it. Saori tapped on her tablet again. Images of burst pipes, fractured concrete, and collapsed signage appeared on screen. Estimated property damage, 1 million yen. Structural instability that endangered multiple civilians during rescue efforts. She paused. Did anyone at you, or the HPSC DSPLNU? No. Did you face any charges? No. You were rewarded. Graduated. Hero license obtained. Yes. And the man you fought? Charged with murder. Sentenced without trial. Tortured in Tartarus. Shoto remained still. Yes. Do you see the contradiction? I do now. 15 a.m. The defense calls 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. There was a ripple through the courtroom as Izuku walked in, shorter than the others, softer in frame, but undeniably serious. His hair was neatly brushed back, his expression tight. Saori didn't smile. But she didn't attack. Her steps slowed as she approached. Her eyes lingered, unreadable. He raised his right hand. Swore the oath. Hello, Mr. Midoriya. Good morning, counselor. Do you recall June 22nd? Yes. You engaged the hero killer with Mr. Ida and Mr. Todoroki. Yes. You were also 15. Yes. Did you attempt to contact the authorities first? No. Did you believe Stain was about to kill Mr. Ida? Yes. He had a sword to his throat. She nodded, her voice softening by the barest margin. Would you say your actions were in defense of another? Yes. Did you know it was illegal? I did. I couldn't just stand there. Saori glanced briefly at the jury, then back to him. Do you believe that breaking the law to stop something worse is ever justified? Izuku hesitated. I think, if the system is broken and people are suffering because no one's doing anything, then yes. She turned fully now, facing the jury, then walked back toward the stand. Thank you, Mr. Midoriya. A breath hung in the air. No cross-examination was requested. 47 a.m. The verdict of memory with her trio of witness heroes, stepping down, Saori let the room stew. The jury had heard it all. That 3 children, driven by emotion and righteous fury, had broken the law to take down a killer. And that those children were not punished, but uplifted, forgiven, admired, while Stain, older, colder, and far more deliberate, was locked away in Tartarus, the of dignity, denied trial, brutalized in the name of order. Saori didn't need to shout. The hypocrisy spoke for itself. And the courtroom, once again, had no words to answer. Day 4, 9 a.m. Yuzudafu Superior Court, Courtroom 4A. The courtroom had become less a battleground and more an autopsy theater. The walls groaned with the weight of the trial. Reporters swarmed the building outside. Protesters shouted from both sides of the ideological divide. Heroes avoided the press like the plague. The Hero Public Safety Commission's PR department was in full lockdown. But none of that entered Saori Midoriya's mind as she stood confidently at her table. Today, she called her experts. And the truth was about to get loud. 08 a.m. The defense calls Dr. Kodo Mifune, forensic specialist. A bespectacled man in a clean, gray suit stepped forward. In his mid-40s, with a subtle limp and sharp gaze, Dr. Mifune took the stand. He swore the oath. Saori stepped forward, calm but predatory. Dr. Mifune, could you please state your credentials for the record? Certainly. I have 2 PhDs, one in forensic pathology and another in behavioral criminology. I've worked for the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, the International Court of Justice's Special Evidence Bureau, and most recently as a forensic advisor for the Hero Oversight Committee before its dissolution. So you're no stranger to handling sensitive, classified, or politically charged evidence. Not in the least. Saori nodded. Let's get to it. You were given access to sealed records and evidence files concerning one Captain Celebrity, formerly of the Japan-American Hero Exchange Program. Is that correct? Yes. And you reviewed the post-mortem crime scene involving his death, as well as the location known in the file as the basement. I did. The gallery had grown unnervingly quiet. Saori pressed on. What did you find in the basement? Dr. Mifune adjusted his tie slightly. His voice remained clinical, though the content twisted the air like poison gas. 6 juvenile girls were found. Ages ranging from 6 to 14. All were malnourished, physically restrained. They displayed signs of long-term trauma, psychological and physical. 2 of them were PR'd at the time of rescue. A collective gasp echoed. A few jurors instinctively flinched. Was there any indication these girls were there willingly? None. All evidence indicated captivity. High-end biometric locks, no means of escape, and repeated sedative traces in their systems. And the man responsible for this? Dr. Mifune glanced grimly at the display screen showing a headshot of Captain Celebrity. He was the registered property owner. His DNA was found on all 6 victims. Multiple ongoing reports had been buried by HPSC compliance agents. Final question. Did Hero Killer Stain, by killing this man, prevent further abuse from occurring? Yes. Statistically speaking, those 2 girls would have been forced to carry to term in captivity had Stain not acted when he did. Saori turned to the court. She didn't need to say it, but her silence demanded it be heard. 44 a.m. Prosecution cross-examination. Haruto tried to stand with poise. He fumbled with his tie. Dr. Mifune, you say that you believe that Stain, that he, prevented further harm. I said statistically speaking, yes. Dr. Mifune replied, flatly. But isn't it also true that, vigilantes, that they can't be trusted to make these decisions? Isn't it also true that the system, which you're defending, enabled a serial predator to operate freely for over a decade? Objection. Sustained, the judge said. Witness, remain within the scope of questioning. Haruto wiped his forehead. Right. Sorry. He stumbled through a few more questions, half-formed, toothless. By the end, he simply nodded and returned to his seat, defeated. 12 a.m. The defense calls Dr. Mari Yanemura, psychiatrist, a small, intense woman with a clipped voice and military posture, took the stand. Dr. Yanemura specialized in psychological trauma, criminal rehabilitation, and pattern-based criminal profiling. She was well known in psychiatric circles for developing predictive models for criminal relapse. Dr. Yanemura, Saori began, you've reviewed Stain's criminal behavior patterns. Extensively. What conclusions did you draw? That his targets were overwhelmingly corrupt or predatory individuals operating under legal protection or systemic neglect. There is no evidence to suggest he engaged in random or self-serving violence. Would you say he has a consistent, ideology-driven profile? Yes. Rigid morality. Black and white worldview. No thrill-seeking or delusional motivators. Very unusual for a killer. And the likelihood that he would harm innocent civilians. Extremely low. Practically non-existent. His psychological model is consistent with moral absolutists, not SDSTS or narcissists. Thank you. 45 a.m. Haruto's cross-examination collapsed too. 0 Haruto stepped up. Dr. Yanemura, would you agree that Stain is dangerous? Yes. In the same way a scalpel is dangerous, if aimed improperly. B. But he kills people. So do pro-heroes. Do you need a list of how many suspects have accidentally died during capture this year alone? The courtroom shifted again. Haruto deflated. I have no further questions. Everyone in the courtroom thought he was an idiot. 08 a.m. Saori's final expert. Evidence analyst Yoji Fukunaga was a data technician, a legend among defense circles. His job was simple: prove when evidence was manufactured, corrupted, or handled illegally. Saori kept this short and deadly. You ran analysis on the HPSC's evidence against Stain. Yes. Were there anomalies? Oh, several. Timestamps edited post facto. Missing chain of custody logs. Even a few missing original video feeds, swapped out for edited reels. And what does that mean for the court? It means their case is built on tampered evidence. Legally speaking, inadmissible. Haruto's final attempt. Haruto stood up. He looked like a man at sea without a paddle. And Saori knew it. Why you're accusing the HPSC of fraud? I'm demonstrating their forensic incompetence, sir, Fukunaga replied. I mean, why you don't know it was deliberate? No, but the consequences are the same. Objection, speculation. Overruled, said Judge Morita. Witness is a qualified expert. Haruto sat back down without another word. 30 a.m. The court breaks for recess. Saori didn't smile. Not in court. But as she watched Haruto bury his face into his hands, she felt it. Victory was assembling itself. Not as a roar, but as a cold, inevitable truth. And she wasn't done yet. 40 p.m., court resumes after recess. Mizutofu Superior Court, Courtroom 4A. The bailiff announced the return to session. Saori Midoriya stood with a calculated calm. Her notes were perfectly arranged. Her hair remained tightly braided, not a strand out of place. Her signature green pantsuit, half unbuttoned and slightly loosened at the collar, was as deliberate as her smirk. The jury had returned with more intensity in their eyes. They smelled BLD. And Saori was more than happy to keep the scent fresh. She cleared her throat as she rose. The defense calls its next witness, Mr. Kaito Renga. 42 p.m., witness takes the stand. A thin man mid-50s in a faded brown suit, adjusted his glasses and took a seat. He was pale, gaunt, and looked like he hadn't slept soundly in a decade. His file had labeled him a low-priority civil liability risk when he blew the whistle 3 years ago. He'd spent the past 2 years homeless, discredited, and jobless. And now, Saori was giving him a mic, Mr. Renga, please state your occupation, former or otherwise, for the court. I was the senior internal auditor for the Hero Public Safety Commission for 17 years. Saori's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Why are you no longer employed there? The pause. Because I submitted a series of internal reports accusing the Commission of financial fraud, suppression of whistleblowing, and falsification of hero clearance protocols for dozens of pro-heroes, some of whom were later implicated in murder, abuse, trafficking, and smuggling. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. And what happened when you submitted these reports through proper internal channels? My reports were lost. I was suspended pending review. Then fired. My clearance was revoked. My professional license was mysteriously voided by the National Ethics Board 1 week later. Did any other agency investigate your claims? No. They said it was an internal personnel matter. Did you keep records? I encrypted everything. And I turned those records over to you, Ms. Midoriya. Saori turned to the jury and held up a heavy black binder marked Exhibit X. This binder contains over 300 pages of unredacted internal audits, fraudulent hero promotions, misallocated quirk suppression tech, warrantless surveillance orders, embezzlement, and yes, coordination between the HPSC and the Commission's supposed Ethical Oversight Board to silence whistleblowers like Mr. Renga. Would you like to read to the court one of the memos you sent? Renga opened to a flagged page and read, to Commissioner N. Hoshino, subject, Emergency Reclassification Audit, Tier A2 Entry 17 Hero Alias. Captain Celebrity. The subject has failed multiple psychological assessments, has 17 internal HR complaints, and has been flagged twice for suspicious disappearances. Recommendation, termination and license revocation. Result, request denied. Risk suppression requested. Do not pursue further. K. Renga, lead auditor. Silence. And then Saori delivered her dagger. In your professional opinion, had your warnings been followed, would Stain have ever needed to act? No. Not once. 08 p.m., Haruto's cross-examination. Haruto stood, visibly sweating through his pressed shirt. His collar was damp. His lips twitched. He gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Mr. Renga, are you saying the entire commission is corrupt? I'm saying the system is compromised. Top to bottom. B. But how do we know you're telling the truth? I gave Ms. Midoriya my full digital archives. All verified. Cross-checked. I even included personal recordings from 2 commissioners threatening to have me institutionalized. Isn't it possible you're just a disgruntled employee? Oh, I'm very disgruntled. But I have facts. Haruto gulped. No further questions. As he sat, the audience noticed Saori's sideways glance at him, like a lion who found the weak cub in the herd. 21 p.m., Haruto's turn. The state calls 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐵, alias Hero Killer Stain. Stain was brought in shackled, but he walked with poise. The courtroom stiffened. Even bound, he carried presence. His disheveled hair was tied back. He wore no hero killer mask, just a blank expression. His red scarf remained untouched. The court had ruled it non-lethal. Haruto took a breath and stood. Mr. Akaguro, is it true that you murdered over 40 registered heroes? Stain tilted his head. That's the charge. And you don't deny that? No. Why? Because they weren't heroes. They were parasites, selling glory under the illusion of justice. Did you think you were above the law? Stain's eyes narrowed. No. I simply acted in the vacuum left behind when the law refused to act. Isn't that just vigilantism with extra steps? Saori watched as Haruto tried to score points, like a toddler poking a bear with a stick. Sometimes justice requires action. Stain said, low and powerful. I'm not a saint. But those I killed, your heroes, they were monsters wearing state-sanctioned masks. You think that excuses murder. I think someone had to stop a Pefli keeping girls in a locked basement. I think your government protected him. And I think you're asking the wrong questions. The jury froze. Haruto backed off like a coward. No further questions. Stain said nothing more as the judge dismissed him from the stand. 2:09 p.m., courtroom 4A. The room was silent. Unnaturally so. The court stenographer had already changed out 2 pads from sheer volume. The gallery was full of civilians, reporters, a few heroes, some retired, some still active, all of them leaning forward in rapt attention. Stain sat in the witness box. Though shackled at wrist and ankle, he appeared relaxed. His red scarf was draped loosely over his shoulders, and he watched the courtroom with an impassive gaze, like a wolf appraising a jury of sheep. Judge Nakamura adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Midoriya, your witness." Saori stood, smoothed out her breathed leg, and approached with the calm confidence of a conductor before a crescendo. Her tie hung loosely around her neck, as always, the top buttons undone, but her mind was razor-sharp. She gave Stain a slight nod. He inclined his head, just barely. Agreement or recognition? 11 p.m., the cross-examination begins. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, thank you for your testimony. Didn't come here to hide." "No. I imagine not." Saori turned slightly to the jury. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐽𝐻, is it true that you only killed pro-heroes?" "Correct. Never civilians. Never students." "Not once." "Why not?" "Because my crusade wasn't against the people. It was against those who betrayed what it means to protect them." Saori paced slowly. "Let's talk about Captain Celebrity." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Multiple hero agencies have since confirmed he had 6 minor girls imprisoned in a personal property hidden from public record. 2 were 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐴 when found. "You killed him." "I slit his throat and reported the girls in the basement to a detective whose number I had during my time as the vigilante Stendhal." "Why?" Stain's eyes didn't waver. "Because he was untouchable. Because the HPSC gave him medals instead of chains. Because those girls would have died. And because if I hadn't, no one else would have." Saori held the silence that followed like a weapon. She let the room feel it. 18 p.m., reframing the monster. "Did you enjoy it? The killing?" "No. I hated every second of it." "Then why?" "Because every broken bone, every gutted monster, every scream in the night, bought someone else a chance to sleep a little safer." Saori took a long breath. "The prosecution would label you a terrorist. A killer. A madman. Is that accurate?" "I'm no hero. But I'm not a coward." "What do you mean?" "I didn't sit behind a desk and stamp approval on predators. I didn't turn my back when girls screamed in basements. I did what needed to be done. Even if it meant breaking the law." Stain nodded. "Sometimes the law protects the wrong people." 25 p.m., building the moral high ground. Saori glanced at the jury. Many of them were leaning forward now, breathing slowly. "I'm holding a letter," she said, retrieving a folded note from her file, written by a civilian. "A mother of one of the rescued girls. May I read it, Your Honor?" The judge allowed it. "Dear Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐽𝐻, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but thank you. I wish it hadn't come to this. I wish someone had stopped him before it became your job. But you saved my daughter. She's alive. She still wakes up crying, but she's alive. And she still calls you her hero." A tear slipped down one juror's face. Another covered her mouth. Saori folded the letter. "Do you know how many civilians you saved?" "I didn't keep count," Stain said. "I never did it for gratitude." 30 p.m., the final questions. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐽𝐻, are you asking this jury for forgiveness?" "No." "Then what are you asking for?" Stain turned and looked at the jury. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm asking them to understand why monsters exist in the first place." A stillness swept the room. Saori let it linger, then nodded. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐻𝐽𝐻, you may step down." The chains clinked as Stain rose, bowed slightly to the court, and returned to his seat with the calm of a man who had nothing left to fear. 35 p.m. Instructions to the jury. Judge Nakamura looked worn. Her voice carried weight, exhaustion, and undeniable gravity. "You have heard all evidence. You will now deliberate on the charges. You are not to speak with anyone, review media, or discuss this case outside of your private chamber. She turned to the bailiff. Escort the jury to deliberation. 12 people stood. They walked silently toward the chamber door. Some stiff. Some trembling. One wiping tears. The door closed behind them with a muted click. Hours later, 6:49 p.m., the jury door creaked open, and 12 tired faces filed back into the courtroom. The audience leaned forward. The judge tapped her gavel twice. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Nakamura returned to the bench. The foreman held a folded slip of paper in trembling fingers. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman nodded. We have, Your Honor. A bailiff took the slip, walked it to the judge, who read it silently. Her brow lifted ever so slightly. She handed it back. You may read the verdict. The courtroom stilled. In the case of the state versus 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, on all counts of murder in the first degree, attempted murder, vigilantism, and terrorism, the foreman took a breath. We find the defendant not guilty. Shock, applause, and silence. The reaction was a bomb. Half the courtroom gasped. A few wept. Others sat in stunned silence. Stain didn't move. He merely closed his eyes, a long breath hissing from between his teeth, relief, perhaps. Or exhaustion. From the back, one of the mothers who had testified let out a choked sob of joy. Another person began clapping, hesitant, then others joined in. The judge banged the gavel hard. This is a courtroom, not a stadium. Order. Saori smiled faintly as she leaned back in her seat. Her green suit had a faint wrinkle from the long day, but her posture radiated quiet triumph. Then came the real surprise. 5:53 p.m., the arrest. 4 uniformed officers entered the courtroom from a side door. Not quietly, not subtly. They walked with grim intent toward the prosecution bench. Haruto Senda looked up in confusion, half rising. What's going on? The lead officer, a veteran detective with gray stubble and tired eyes, pulled a folded warrant from his pocket and read aloud. Haruto 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, you are under arrest for multiple counts of SXL assault and RPE under Penal Code 115-03, including but not limited to incidents dated between February and May of this year. Haruto's face drained of color. What? Wait, this must be some kind of... The officers moved swiftly. Cuffs clicked tight around his wrists before the sentence was finished. One officer read his rights with professional detachment. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say, wait, I didn't, this has to be a mistake. You have the right to an attorney. The courtroom watched in stunned horror. Even Judge Nakamura stood frozen behind her bench. Her mouth slightly agape. Haruto was still sputtering denials when they pulled him from the bench. One of the officers placed a firm hand on his shoulder and guided him down the aisle. His tie was askew, his confidence shattered. No one came to his defense. As he passed by Saori, still handcuffed and shouting, she merely crossed her legs and exhaled a puff of smoke from a relit cigar. Guess we're both good at uncovering secrets, she muttered beneath her breath. The doors slammed shut behind Haruto. 5:58 p.m. The dust settles. Judge Nakamura cleared her throat and stood. Court is adjourned. Gavel. A flurry of noise erupted, press, murmurs, hurried steps. But at the center of the chaos, Saori Midoriya remained seated, watching the courtroom empty out like a battlefield after the last blow. Her phone vibrated once. A new message. That makes 2. Who's next? Unknown number. She grinned slowly and stood, straightening her blazer. Better call Saori. After Saori returned to her office, she thought about Haruto's arrest with a smirk on her lips. It was too goddamn easy, she thought to herself, framing him for using his N that he dumped inside me. She chuckled to herself. It was worth it. At least now I don't have to let that shrimp PP loser F me again, she thought smugly. Perhaps I'll go out and find someone to give me a good time. Literally any more could do better than him. You know what, I'm gonna visit Izuga before I do that, she thought, wondering how her baby brother is doing. Location: Mizudafu Midoriya residence time. 9:37 a.m. 2 days after the verdict, the sun slanted low through the half-shut blinds, spilling gold over a living room that was both modest and scrupulously clean. Dust motes danced in the sunlight like slow-moving snow. On a small wooden table sat a barely touched bowl of rice, a set of chopsticks resting against its side, and a cup of cooling green tea. Saori Midoriya sat silently on the couch, dressed in a simple black shirt and gray sweatpants, one socked foot bouncing restlessly as he stared ahead at the muted television screen. The news station was replaying the closing moments of State vs. Stain, his own face frozen in mid-testimony, eyes wide behind his lashes. His lips were tight, his eyes distant. Knock, knock, knock. 3 firm raps echoed from the door. He blinked, shook himself, and stood to open it. And there she was. Hair tied in her signature braided ponytail, dressed, of course, in a fresh green pantsuit with the tie loosened, and her top 2 buttons undone in that classic mixture of formality and rebellion. Saori Midoriya, defense attorney. Sister. Izuku stepped aside wordlessly, allowing her to enter. Saori walked in without hesitation, her heels clicking on the wood floor. She glanced around, gave a low whistle. Still the same place. Still clean. You really oughta let someone mess it up once in a while, little bro. Izuku closed the door. You want coffee? You got real cream. No. Then no. They sat in silence for a moment. Saori lit a cigar, without asking of course, and waved away the smoke from his direction. Izuku broke the quiet first. Why are you here? Her eyes softened a little, just around the edges. She leaned back, exhaled a ring of smoke toward the ceiling fan. Checking in. The verdict shook a lot of people. Figured you'd be one of them. Izuku rubbed his temples. I testified. I said what I saw, what I felt. But I still don't know how to feel about it. About Stain. About what you did. Saori nodded slowly. Yeah. That's the job, Izuku. Make people uncomfortable with the truth they thought they understood. You made a murderer into a martyr. She turned her head toward him, fixing him with an unreadable stare. I didn't make him anything. He already was. I just showed the jury what nobody else wanted to admit. Including you. Izuku looked away, jaw tight. I saw what he did. What he tried to do to Ida, to me. He was going to kill us. And he didn't. What? Because I stopped him. No. Her voice sharpened. Because he didn't want to kill you. That's the uncomfortable part, right? He didn't see you as corrupted. He saw you as what? The last good thing in the hero world. She flicked ash into a small dish he hadn't realized she'd brought. I don't agree with him, but he wasn't wrong about a lot of those heroes. Captain Celebrity. The tapes made me sick, Izuku. PRGNT girls in a basement. Children. And the HPSC. Quirk sterilization, torture. Hell, if Tartarus was a hotel, even demons would give it 1 star on Yelp. Izuku shuddered. That doesn't mean Stain should walk free. No, she agreed. But it means the system put him there without bothering to ask the right questions. The kind you should have been asking years ago. Silence again. She sighed, her voice losing its sharpness. I'm not trying to hurt you, kid. You're one of the few people left in this goddamn world I give a DMN about. But this game we're in. It's not about justice. It's about who controls the board. He looked up at her, eyes weary. I'm tired, Saori. She gave a half laugh. Me too. He stood and fetched her a bottle of water instead of the coffee she refused. She took it, gave a wordless nod of thanks, and sipped slowly. So what now? He asked. Now I wait. There's always another case. Another BSTRD calling from a dark corner asking for a miracle. You'd be amazed how many guilty people still deserve a proper defense. Izuku leaned back, arms folded across his chest. And what about Haruto? A slow grin crept over her face. He'll get a lawyer. Hopefully not as good as me. He'll get a trial. Evidence will speak for itself. Maybe he'll rot. Maybe he'll weasel out. Doesn't matter. My hands are clean. I didn't make him do what he did, I just gave him enough rope to trip over. Alt-hot I did frame him using this seed that he dumped inside me. Izuku stood, walked over to the window. Outside, civilians moved through Mizudafu like any other day, unaware their world had shifted under them. I don't think I could ever do what you do, he admitted. You shouldn't, she said, standing up beside him. You've got a heart. You'd break before your second trial. He smiled faintly. Still, he added, thanks for stopping by. She pulled him into a sudden hug, a rare gesture from her. Anytime, little brother. Location, Saori Midoriya's law office, Muzudafu, 1:27 p.m. The door creaked open with its usual groan as Saori stepped inside, cigar already perched between her teeth and her jacket slung over one shoulder. The scent of legal briefs, dust, and stale tobacco smoke clung to the air like wallpaper. Her assistant wasn't at the front desk, a rare thing, but she chalked it up to lunch. She passed into her office proper, kicking the door open with the toe of her heel, and stopped cold. Sitting in her client chair, back straight, hands folded atop a knee, was Toshinori Yagi. Not in his all-might form. Not standing as the unshakable symbol of peace, but in his thin, gaunt, deeply human body. Hair slicked back neatly. Black suit. Quiet eyes. He looked older than she remembered. Miss Midoriya, he greeted, voice rough but calm. I hope I'm not intruding. Saori slowly closed the door behind her, eyes narrowed, cigar still clenched tight. Oh no, she drawled, just the ghost of Japan's failed utopia showing up uninvited in my office. By all means, make yourself at home. Toshinori gave a tight-lipped smile. Still as charming as ever. Saori threw her jacket onto the back of her chair and sat down with a grunt, ashtrays scraped closer. To what do I owe this nostalgic little reunion? Didn't think you and I had anything left to say, Yagi? He studied her for a long moment. I've come to ask you a question. A few, actually, and I would appreciate honest answers. She gestured to the ceiling with her cigar. This place is swept twice a week. No bugs. You're safe to talk. Toshinori leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why defend them? Saori tilted her head. All for one. Monsters, some would say. Criminals by the letter of the law. Why put your name and your brother's reputation on the line for them? Her eyes half-lidded. You already know the answer. I want to hear it from you. She tapped ash into the tray, then met his gaze dead-on. Because somebody had to remind the world that even monsters are still entitled to the law. You think letting all for one rot in Tartarus without due process was justice. You think slapping a label like villain on someone gives the state the right to torture, sterilize, erase people. Toshinori's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. I fought to protect people. You fought, she interrupted, to preserve an illusion. And that illusion shattered the moment they dragged Stain out of a hole and put him on trial, and I made DM ensure that the whole world saw what you and the HPSC never wanted them to. She jabbed the air with her cigar for emphasis. This country doesn't have a justice system. It has a control system. Stain and all for one weren't just criminals, they were threats to the myth. And instead of facing them in a courtroom, you threw fists and fire and hoped no one would ask questions after the fact. Toshinori inhaled slowly. And what about your brother? He asked, voice low. Izuku believed in you. He watched you defend men who spat on everything he's ever stood for. The pause. Then her voice softened, just slightly. He still does believe in me. Because he knows I'd defend him just the same. If they ever turned on him, if they ever decided to make him the scapegoat for some backroom scandal or say he used excessive force, who do you think would stand in that courtroom with him? Toshinori looked down at his hands. The silence between them stretched. Do you really think all for one deserve to walk free? He asked. No, she answered, unflinching. But he deserved a trial. And the government gave me every tool I needed to win that trial by trying to cheat him out of it. That's not my fault, Toshinori. That's theirs. He let out a breath. And Stain. That man's hands are stained with BLD. But not blind BLD. And certainly not the BLD of innocence. You were too high in the clouds to see the rot in the tower you helped build. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. I saw it all. So did he. For a long moment, Toshinori didn't speak. The wind stirred through a cracked window. A distant siren wailed, echoing somewhere in the concrete maze outside. When he spoke again, it was with the weariness of someone who had carried too much for too long. I hope you know what you've set into motion. Saori leaned back in her chair, cigar slowly burning to its nub. I do. And I'm not done yet. Toshinori stood. Saori didn't offer a handshake. He didn't expect one. At the door, he paused, glancing back at her. You know, if you'd chosen a different path, you might have made one hell of a hero. She smiled. I am a hero. Just not the kind you remember. The door clicked shut behind him. Saori sat in the silence for a long while after, staring at the empty chair. Eventually, she reached for her phone. 3 new voicemails. One from her assistant. One from a client she'd forgotten about. And one blocked number. She smiled faintly. Here we go again. Location: Saori Midoriya's office, Muzudafu, 8:13 a.m. It had been a rare quiet morning. The kind that only happened when the world hadn't yet had its first coffee or scandal. Saori Midoriya sat behind her desk, a mug of espresso in one hand and her tablet in the other, scrolling through a dozen ongoing cases, appeals, motions, and political flares waiting to ignite. Her name was in 5 different national papers. The headlines danced between legal anarchist and champion of civil rights. She couldn't care less about either. A knock interrupted her reading. 2 reps. Uncertain. Come in. Her assistant peeked in, wide-eyed and nervous. There's someone from the Attorney General's office here to see you. Saori raised an eyebrow. Tell them to make an appointment like everyone else. They said you wouldn't want to miss this one. The pause. Then the door opened wider, and a tall man in a crisp gray suit stepped inside. Silver-rimmed glasses, emotionless expression, and a leather briefcase polished to a mirror shine. Miss Midoriya, he said coolly. I'm Deputy Chief Prosecutor Tanaka. I'm here on behalf of the Ministry of Justice. Congratulations, she said flatly, taking another sip of her coffee. Want a medal, or just directions to the exit? He didn't flinch. We're offering you a temporary appointment. As a special prosecutor. Now that made her raise her head fully. Did you take a wrong turn into irony? Because I'm not exactly your brand of loyalist. It's exactly why we want you, Tanaka said, stepping forward and opening his case. We're assigning independent prosecution to one case. Highly public. Politically radioactive. No D. Wants to touch it. The HPSC was dissolved. Most of the Public Safety Bureau is still under internal investigation. He slid a folder across the desk. Saori opened it lazily, and then her eyes narrowed. Subject: Go to 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐸𝐵, muscular, charges. 39 counts of homicide, 14 attempted murders, 7 counts of terrorism, 11 counts of destruction of public property, 3 counts of endangering minors, conspiracy to commit mass violence, illegal use of a quirk for violent crime, and obstruction of justice. Muscular, she murmured. I thought he was being fast-tracked to permanent isolation. He was, Tanaka confirmed. But his legal team filed a last-minute appeal and forced a retrial based on the precedent you set in All for One versus Japan. Due process, flawed arrest procedures, illegal quirk suppression without hearing. Sound familiar? She let out a low whistle. So now you need someone to prosecute the monster, or risk another blow to public confidence. Exactly. And frankly, no one in the system has your instincts, courtroom control, or capacity for ruthlessness. You've gutted our side before. Now we need you to burn the other one. Saori stared at the file a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. What's the catch? You'll have full control over the case. Staff selection. Evidence management. You're a temporary appointee with no chain of command, but if you screw up, the ministry disavows you completely. The pause. Oh, Tanaka added, and we need you to win. If Muscular walks, there won't be another symbol left to trust in the justice system. Saori reached for a fresh cigar and lit it with a flick of her old silver lighter. The hell makes you think I want to prosecute someone? She asked through smoke. I'm the woman that made All for One look like a political prisoner and turned Stain into a misunderstood patriot. Which makes you the only person who can do this and not look like a puppet. He handed her a final document, her contract. Temporary prosecutorial authority. Pay triple her rate. All expenses covered. One condition, win the case. She tapped the ashtray twice. Then slowly smiled. I'll do it. Tanaka blinked. That's all. But I want full authority over how I do it. Including jury selection. Including media handling. Including using my own staff. Done. And if this falls apart, if this case smells even a little like another government whitewash, I walk. He hesitated. Then nodded. Understood. She plucked the pen from her jacket pocket and signed the contract. Better hope your bogeyman doesn't have another skeleton he's hiding, she said, pushing the folder back across the table. Because this time, I'm the one bringing the fire. Location, Mizuta for High Security Detention Facility, 5:47 p.m. Through thick glass, Saori stared at the mountain of muscle and rage chained to the floor like a beast from myth. Go-to Imasuji, muscular, smiled with too many teeth. You're the one they sent to kill me legally, he rasped. Saori leaned into the mic. No, darling, she said with a grin. I volunteered. His eyes widened for just a second. Realizing that he was completely fed. Location, Saori Midoriya's office. One day later it started before sunrise. Her phone buzzed once, then a cascade of alerts came in, reports, databases unlocking, classified footage decrypting, subpoenas signed by judges, and internal contacts from across Japan's fractured law enforcement community finally cooperating under the shadow of Saori Midoriya's name. By 7 a.m., the war room at her office was fully converted. Whiteboards, evidence walls, dozens of pinned crime scene photos, a forensic map that looked like a spiderweb drawn in BLD. Several junior clerks and legal interns bustled between stations, moving like a well-drilled machine of vengeance. Saori stood at the center, coffee in one hand, a fountain pen in the other, her green pantsuit still immaculate despite 16 hours without rest. This case, she began, her voice cutting through the noise, is not about morality. It's not about hope. It's not even about muscular. The room froze. It's about precision. We're not here to debate if he's a monster. That's obvious. We're here to prove, beyond a shadow of doubt, that every act he committed violates every article of law this country has left intact. She pointed to a column of documents. First, we organize crime scene analysis. His confirmed kills, 39. I want the forensics for every single one cross-referenced. Victim profiles. Cause of death. Quirk traces. Autopsy consistency. Locations mapped. Her fingers slid across a tablet. Call in Dr. Keed Matsuno, forensic pathologist from the Yokohama Massacre Tribunal. She'll hold under cross. Next, she tapped a box labeled, Survivors, we move to witnesses. There was a long pause. Then she turned to the junior clerk. Get me Izuku Midoriya. And Kota Izumi. No. But, Saori, her assistant said cautiously, you never call in family. Her pen stopped midair. I make exceptions when family nearly died. That silenced the room. Location, Midoriya residence, 2:13 p.m. You're really doing this? Izuku asked. You're going after muscular yourself. Saori nodded, seated across from her brother at the kitchen table. She hadn't touched her tea. You and Kota were children. And no one got justice for it. No warrant. No trial. Just a villain locked in a cage and forgotten. That stops now. Izuku hesitated. I still remember that day. Every punch. Every time I thought he'd tear me apart. Kota was barely breathing after. His voice faltered. I won't let him get away, Saori said, voice low. But I can't bury him unless I have the whole truth. You'll testify. Izuku looked her in the eyes and nodded. I'll testify. Good. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Because I'm going to make him wish he'd stayed in Tartarus. Location, Japan Pro Hero Agency Archives, 4:42 p.m. The access was restricted. Former HPSC records were sealed under 100 layers of bureaucracy. But Better Call Saori didn't get that nickname by following the rules. She flashed her temporary prosecutor's badge and a heavily redacted executive order. Within 20 minutes, she had the full file, Muscular's entire timeline. Kill counts, Victim testimonies. Hero agency reports that had never made the news. Internal reviews where pro-heroes had hesitated to pursue him because of potential PR fallout. Black ink censored entire paragraphs. She scanned the last page and swore softly under her breath. Among the buried records were at least 6 instances of witness tampering, 5 committed by HPSC agents themselves. They tried to bury the case, to suppress it, to keep the public from knowing just how many times they'd let a villain like Muscular escape consequences. Saori didn't say a word. She just started copying. Location: Forensics Laboratory, Tokyo University, 7:31 p.m. Dr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐬𝐚 had just finished reviewing 3 murder scenes when she looked up at Saori and asked, "You really want to present all of this? Some of it's graphic. Brutal." "I want the jury to feel what his victims felt," Saori replied. "I want them to look at each bloodstain and ask why he's still breathing." Dr. Matsuno nodded grimly and continued assembling her report. Location: Mizudafu Courthouse Archives, 9:08 p.m. Witness lists were finalized. Izuku Midoriya, primary survivor of a near-fatal villain assault. Kota Izumi, civilian minor victim of attempted homicide. Shota Aizawa, eraser head, field instructor, incident witness. Ryuko Tatsumaru, core crime analyst. Pro-hero firehose, first on the scene post-attack. 3 local civilians, who had Kota and tended wounds. Expert witnesses included Dr. Matsuno, forensic pathologist. Kiyomi Tetsuka, trauma psychologist, for impact statements. Inspector Aranaka, head of villain registry database. Mariko Jean, HPSC whistleblower on procedural failure. Legal motions filed. Subpoena for every facility Muscular had been transferred through. Court order for full transparency of his quirk suppression schedule. Request for unredacted HPSC documents regarding ignored bounty alerts. Location: Saori's office, 1:41 a.m. She stood in front of the wall, now fully covered with case files, printed statements, and crime scene maps. Every inch of it screamed pain, corruption, and justice long delayed. Saori exhaled, lit a cigar, and stared at the name centered at the very top. Go to Imasuji, Muscular pinned in red ink. "You hurt my brother," she muttered. "You're going to burn for that, you spineless coward." The courtroom was packed, every seat occupied, the air thick with tension and the faint metallic scent of anticipation. On one side, the prosecution table gleamed with unshakable confidence. Behind it sat Saori Midoriya, the infamous defense attorney turned special prosecutor, her trademark green pantsuit crisply ironed, the loosened tie a stark contrast to the razor-sharp mind she wielded like a blade. Her gaze was icy, unwavering. She was flanked by a small but formidable team, legal experts, investigators, and expert witnesses whose dossiers read like the greatest hits of criminal justice reform. Opposite them, a motley crew of defense attorneys huddled like a fishing boat bobbing helplessly before a colossal storm. Their leader, a wiry, nervy man barely out of his 30s, shuffled his papers with trembling hands. The defense's entire arsenal paled compared to the Yamato-sized prosecution. The judge, a veteran jurist with a reputation for fairness but no tolerance for gamesmanship, banged her gavel sharply. Court is now in session. The State of Japan versus Go to Imasuji, Muscular. Prosecution, your opening statement. Saori's opening statement. Saori rose. The room instantly quieted as if the very air awaited her words. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, her voice smooth and deliberate, "today, you will hear the story of a man who not only violated every law but shattered every moral boundary we hold sacred." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Muscular is no mere villain. He is a terror, a predator who stalked the streets, who brutalized innocent civilians, and whose hands are stained with the blood of dozens of victims. Many of these deaths were preventable, and yet, because of systemic failures, they were not. The jurors leaned in. But this case is not just about the man. It is about the failure of institutions that allowed him to thrive. It is about corruption, complacency, and cruelty disguised as justice. Her gaze swept over the courtroom. You will see that Muscular's crimes were met with a systemic blindness, one that the defense would have you ignore. But we will not. Today, you will hear evidence of abuse, of cover-ups, and of a system's willful neglect to protect its citizens. Saori's eyes narrowed as she concluded, you will see that this man is guilty, but more importantly, that the negligence that enabled his reign cannot be ignored. Justice must be served, not only on him but on those who let him flourish. She sat down, and the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Defense opening statement. The defense attorney rose nervously, voice cracking. Your Honor, members of the jury, he said, the state paints my client as a monster. A terror. But you will see that this trial is not just about Muscular's actions, but about the state's longing to find a scapegoat. He shuffled his notes. My client has been labeled a villain, yes. But he is also a product of a broken system. A system that failed him as much as it failed his victims. The attorney glanced at Saori. We ask you to look beyond the rhetoric, beyond the emotional appeals, and to remember that everyone deserves a fair trial. We will show that the evidence is circumstantial, that many accusations are hearsay, and that the prosecution's case is built on shaky ground. He faltered, swallowing hard. Above all, we ask you to keep an open mind. Presentation of initial evidence. The judge called for the prosecution to proceed. Saori rose again, signaling to the bailiff, who wheeled in a large monitor. Let's begin, she said, her voice steady, with the undeniable truth. First up was a harrowing series of crime scene photos, shown one by one to the jury. Images of mangled debris, blood-spattered walls, and shattered bones. The prosecutor carefully walked the jurors through each photo. These are the scenes left behind after Muscular's attacks, she explained. Notice the brutality. Notice the victims' injuries, many sustained from close combat, impossible to avoid, impossible to ignore. Next came witness statements, survivors, civilians, heroes. Saori emphasized the stories of children caught in the crossfire, families destroyed, lives shattered. The defense whispered quietly among themselves, clearly overwhelmed. The prosecution then called the first expert witness, a forensic pathologist who meticulously explained the cause of death in dozens of cases. How did these wounds occur? Saori asked, her tone clinical. Blunt force trauma consistent with superhuman strength, the witness replied. The courtroom grew silent. The scale of the trial, the contrast was stark. Saori, like a Yamato battleship, commanded the field with overwhelming force. Her evidence was methodical, devastatingly detailed, and presented with calm certainty. The defense, the fishing boat in this storm, struggled to keep pace, their arguments scattered and weak. The judge occasionally cast weary glances at the defense table. By the day's end, it was clear who controlled the courtroom. Saori sat back, lighting a cigar with a subtle smirk. This was only the beginning. The courtroom was brimming with a different kind of energy as Day 2 of State vs. Muscular opened. The tension from the previous day had not waned. If anything, it had deepened, soaked into the walls, into the wood grain of the jury box, into the bloodstreams of every onlooker. Saori sat with her legs crossed at the prosecution table, files neatly organized in front of her like surgical instruments. She wasn't just prepared, she was poised to dismantle the defense with the precision of a neurosurgeon and the force of a demolition team. The defense, by contrast, looked like they hadn't slept. Their lead attorney, the same jittery man from yesterday, gulped water every few minutes and avoided eye contact with the press gathered in the gallery. The judge called for the trial to resume. Prosecution, she said. You may call your first witness. First witness, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. The doors opened, and 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 entered the courtroom. The air shifted with the weight of his presence. A pro-hero in every sense, clad in civilian attire but with the unmistakable aura of someone who'd seen war. He took the stand, swore the oath, and sat. Saori stood. Her voice was cool, but anyone listening closely could detect the faintest undertone of personal stake. Her younger brother was here, testifying against someone who had once nearly killed him. Mr. Midoriya, she began, you were present during an encounter with the defendant while you were a student, correct? Yes, he said. At a training camp when he attacked us. He killed heroes. Almost killed Kota Izumi. And tried to kill me. And what were the injuries you sustained? He inhaled. Crushed ribs, multiple muscle tears, BLD loss, severe trauma. He broke through enhanced reinforcement and regeneration from Recovery Girl. I couldn't move for 2 days. Were you armed? Only with provisional training. Not real equipment. And he? Saori asked, voice sharp. He fought with intent to kill, Izuku replied. And enjoyed it. The jury took it in. Many winced. When it came time for cross-examination, the defense lawyer stood, then sat back down. No questions, Your Honor, he muttered. A soft ripple of disbelief passed through the room. Second witness, Kota Izumi, a boy of maybe 10 or 11, entered next. A civilian child, the son of the water hose hero duo. Heroes who had been slaughtered by Muscular years ago. Kota walked stiffly to the stand, clearly uncomfortable. His eyes flickered towards Saori, and she offered a small, encouraging nod. Kota, she said gently, thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy. He nodded. You were present when Muscular attacked the camp. Yes, he whispered. I tried to fight him. I thought heroes were useless. But Izuku saved me. What did you see that day? He said he was going to kill me. He laughed. I saw his eyes. They didn't look human. And how did you survive? Because Izuku bled for me. He fought even though he was hurt. Muscular said it was fun. Like a game. A tear trickled down the boy's face. Saori turned to the jury. No further questions. The defense attorney fumbled with his notes. Kota, do you know the difference between someone who's evil and someone who's just, misunderstood? Kota blinked. He murdered my parents. The silence afterward was devastating. No further questions, the defense muttered, collapsing into his chair. Third witness, Shota Aizawa. Eraserhead. Next up was Shota Aizawa, grim as ever, scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, posture straight but relaxed in the way of a man always prepared for ambush. Saori gave him a nod. Mr. Aizawa, how would you classify Goto Imitsuji's behavior from a professional hero standpoint? Calculated brutality, he said immediately. He didn't fight out of necessity. He hunted. Do you believe he was capable of rehabilitation at the time of his arrest? No, Aizawa answered. He didn't just kill. He made examples out of his victims. There was no remorse. Only control. Did you personally view the autopsy photos of victims? Yes. Would you describe them as consistent with normal combat injuries? They were consistent with torture. Even some of the jury members paled at that. On cross, the defense attorney again tried to redirect. Mr. Aizawa, isn't it true that you once expelled a whole class of students? How do we know you're not just hard to please? Aizawa's eyes narrowed. Because I'm not the one on trial for mass murder. The courtroom stifled laughter. The defense attorney turned beet red. Expert witnesses. The final portion of the day was a blitzkrieg of expert testimony. A forensic pathologist described the injuries of the 26 identified victims, explaining that the sheer force used to crush bones and rupture organs indicated a profound enjoyment of inflicting suffering. The psychological profiler described Muscular as a textbook example of high-functioning sociopathy with an obsessive impulse to dominate others physically. Finally, a survivor advocate read statements from victims' families. One described a child who wouldn't speak for months. Another described a woman who miscarried from shock after surviving an encounter with Muscular during his pre-incarceration spree. Each time Haruto attempted to cross-examine, he lost his train of thought, misread evidence, or got corrected by the witnesses themselves. By midday, the jury was actively frowning at the defense. End of day 2. As the judge gavelled, the court adjourned for the day. Saori leaned back in her chair, calm and silent. The Yamato had fired another salvo, and the fishing boat on the other side had taken on water fast. She exhaled through her nose, jotting down a note. Tomorrow would be the final blow. The courtroom returned to order after the midday break, though the air had shifted palpably. The jury was no longer just attentive, they were on edge, tense, and visibly disturbed. Every blow Saori had dealt throughout the day landed with thunderous weight, and now it was time for her final move. The defense had no more cards to play, no more expert witnesses to soften the image of their client. They had filed a weak attempt to exclude testimony, denied. They tried to request a mistrial, laughed out of the chamber. Now, Saori stood, her green pantsuit impeccably pressed, the top 2 buttons of her white shirt still open, her emerald tie casually loose. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she turned toward the defense table. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability, "the prosecution calls 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, the defendant, to the stand." The murmurs in the gallery were immediate. Even the judge looked momentarily uncertain. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲," the judge said, "you understand that you are not obligated to testify and that anything you say may be used against you." Muscular grinned from ear to ear, his frame restrained by reinforced cork-proof cuffs. "I got nothing to hide, lady. Let's give him a show." The show begins. He lumbered to the stand with all the subtlety of a predator let loose in a zoo. Once seated, the restraints were left intact, by court order, and the silence was suffocating as he was sworn in. Saori walked slowly to the center of the room. Her heels clicked against the polished floor with deliberate rhythm. She stopped, hands clasped lightly behind her back. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴, she began, voice low, "how long have you been in prison?" "Too long," he growled. These weaklings couldn't handle a little mayhem. "Let's not jump ahead. How many confirmed victims are you currently tied to, Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐴?" He chuckled. "They say might be more. Don't really count, you know. Once they stop moving, it's all the same." A hush fell over the courtroom. The jury froze. The judge's gavel twitched in her hand, but she remained still. "You're admitting to murder, then?" "Hell yeah," he said, flashing teeth. "They begged, screamed. One guy even offered me money. Pathetic. Do you feel regret?" Muscular tilted his head. "For what?" "Killing losers with inflated egos and baby quirks. They were fun. That Midoriya kid, he was a hell of a fight. Almost made me work for it." Saori's eyes narrowed, just slightly. But she kept her tone smooth, calm. "And the children? The unarmed civilians? Was that fun too?" His grin widened. "Little Coda. Brave kid. Probably would have made a good villain if I hadn't gotten interrupted." That was it. The jury wasn't just uncomfortable now, several were visibly nauseous. One of the alternates looked away completely. "Thank you, Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐴," Saori said, voice cool as glass. "No further questions." She returned to her seat without looking back. The last gasps of defense. The defense attorney stood, sweat visibly forming under his collar. His fingers trembled as he adjusted his glasses. "Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐴," he began. You surely must realize that this isn't helping your case." Muscular laughed. Loud, unfiltered, and primal. "My case? Buddy, I am the case. Right?" The defense stammered. But what about redemption? What about possible rehabilitation, or circumstances of upbringing?" "You gonna cry for me now, counselor?" Muscular sneered. "I kill people. I like killing people. You knew that when you took this gig." The lawyer's shoulders slumped. "No further questions," he whispered, then sat down, staring blankly at his own hands. "The judge speaks with no more witnesses and nothing more to be said." The judge gave the nod. "Very well. If there are no further motions, the court will now recess for jury deliberation." The bailiff rose. "All rise for the jury." The jurors stood, silent, eyes grim. One woman clutched her pen so tightly it snapped in half. They were dismissed to the deliberation room without a word. Saori exhaled and sat down. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply returned to her case file, calm as if it were a tax audit and not the dissection of a monster. Across the aisle, the defense attorney buried his face in his hands. And in the gallery, the public could only murmur in disbelief, not at Muscular's admission, but at how easy Saori had made it look. The courtroom was dead silent, the kind of silence that wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, like a heavy fog hanging over every corner of the chamber. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling. No one whispered. No one dared move. 10 minutes. That was all it had taken. The jury re-entered the courtroom, their expressions stony, unreadable. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray eyes and a spine that had somehow straightened even more during the trial, walked with grim purpose, the verdict slip clutched in her hand. "Will the defendant please rise?" the judge intoned, voice unwavering. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲, known to the world as Muscular, stood, cuffed, smirking. Saori didn't move. She sat coolly at the prosecution's table, her eyes narrowed slightly, her tie still loose, her shirt still open at the collar. Just another day, just another demon to be caged or killed. The foreman handed the slip to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The room tensed. The judge read silently. Her jaw clenched ever so slightly. She looked to the jury box. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied, steady and clear. "Please state the verdict." The foreman turned to face the room. Her voice didn't waver. "On all counts of first-degree murder, the jury finds the defendant, 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴𝐵𝐲, guilty. On all counts of premeditated attempted murder, guilty. On the charges of destruction of public property, terrorism, and conspiracy, guilty. On the charges of unlawful use of a quirk resulting in death, guilty." Each word hit like a hammer. Gasps erupted from the gallery. One woman openly wept. A man in the second row clenched his fists, whispering a silent yes under his breath. Muscular blinked. Just once. The smirk faded from his face, replaced by a cold stare. But there was no outburst. He knew. The judge nodded solemnly and looked toward the prosecution table. "Miss Midoriya," she said, "given the scope and severity of these convictions, does the state have a recommendation for sentencing?" Saori stood slowly, deliberately, as though each motion were calculated for effect. She stepped forward, her heels clicking in perfect rhythm against the polished floor. She didn't need notes. She didn't need flair. Her voice alone would carry this moment. "Your Honor," she began, "the crimes committed by 𝐒𝐮𝐴𝐵𝐲 are not just heinous, they are monstrous. He has confessed, gleefully, to dozens of murders. He has shown no remorse. He does not regret the blood he spilled, nor the children he terrorized. He is not a man who lost his way. He is a man who abandoned his humanity, if he ever had it at all." She turned slightly, facing the gallery, then back to the judge. "The prosecution recommends, in the strongest possible terms, a sentence of death." A murmur rippled across the room. Reporters raced to scribble the words. The bailiff stiffened. "But," Saori continued, tone unchanging, "if the court is unwilling to deliver that final justice, then the only alternative we will accept is life without the possibility of parole, to be served in a maximum security quirk restriction facility, where he can never harm another soul again." She paused. "Anything less is a disservice to the lives already lost, and an insult to those who survived." She sat. The judge took a long breath. Her gavel hovered in the air. "Sentencing will be announced tomorrow morning," she said finally, voice hoarse. "Court is adjourned." The courtroom exploded into a cacophony of reaction. Some cheering, some crying, some in stunned silence. Muscular said nothing as he was led away. But Saori Midoriya. She adjusted her tie, leaned back in her chair, and allowed herself, for just a moment, the smallest smile. "Don't worry, Atoto, I'll make sure he will never hurt you again." The next morning, the air around the courthouse was charged with anticipation. Cameras lined the perimeter. Protesters and supporters jostled for space behind barricades. The courthouse itself stood still and solemn under a gray, overcast sky, a fitting backdrop for the storm of justice about to be unleashed. Inside, the courtroom was full, and yet quiet, a hush that spoke of reverence and dread. At the center, bound and flanked by armed guards, stood 𝐒𝐮𝐴𝐵𝐲, the muscular. His smirk was gone. His muscles strained against his restraints, not in anger, but anticipation. It was the first time in his life he looked unsure. Saori Midoriya stood beside the prosecution's table, hands folded behind her back. Her signature green suit looked freshly pressed, and for once, her tie was snug. There were no loosened buttons today. No easy charm. Just steel. The judge, her face weary but resolute, entered and took her seat. The gavel came down with a single, echoing bang. Court is now in session. We are here to deliver sentencing in the matter of the state versus 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲. She turned to Muscular, who did not speak. The silence between her words was thick. After hearing the evidence presented, the testimony of experts and victims, and the defendant's own words on the stand, the court finds that 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐴𝐵𝐶𝐵 represents a clear and unrepentant danger to the public, with no possibility of rehabilitation. There was a pause. The tension was suffocating. The court sentences 𝐒𝐮𝐴𝐵𝐶𝐵 to death by execution. Sentence to be carried out in accordance with national criminal justice procedure, with all due security protocols applied. This is final. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom like a wave. Reporters scrambled. Some civilians burst into tears, of relief, of grief, of finality. Others sat, stunned, as the realization sank in. Muscular's mouth twitched. His body strained against the cuffs again, but this time there was no rage behind it. Only disbelief. The gavel struck again. Court is adjourned. Point of view shift. Saori Midoriya Izuku stood in the viewing gallery, hands clenched at his sides. He hadn't blinked since the judge began speaking. His green eyes were locked on Muscular, the man who had tried to kill him. The man who had almost killed Kota. The man who had slaughtered Kota's parents. And now, he was going to die. It should have felt like vindication. It should have been a moment of triumph. But it wasn't. Izuku's heart was a war zone of conflicting feelings. He had watched Saori, his older sister, systematically dismantle every defense, every excuse, every obstruction with the cool professionalism of a legal juggernaut. She'd hunted Muscular not with a blade or a quirk, but with truth, law, and unyielding will. Izuku had always admired her, but today he feared her a little too. The moment the sentence was declared, people in the gallery began to weep. A woman behind him whispered a prayer. A man to his right said something about justice finally being served. And Izuku just stood there. Muscular was led out of the room. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't even resist. I should feel happy, Izuku whispered to himself. But he didn't. He felt hollow. Was it because of the finality of it? The absolute, irreversible end? Or was it something deeper? A realization that justice could be just as brutal as villainy, only colder. Hey, a voice whispered. It was Kota, standing beside him, holding tightly onto Izuku's jacket sleeve. You okay? Izuku blinked and looked down at him. The kid's face was wet, but not with sadness. He was crying, yes, but out of closure. For the first time in his life, Kota could breathe without fear. Izuku placed a hand on his head and ruffled his hair gently. Yeah, I'm okay. They watched as Saori exited the courtroom through a side door, surrounded by media and legal aides. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She looked forward, eyes steeled, jaw clenched. She did it, Kota murmured. She really did it. Izuku looked back at the empty defendant's chair. No, he said softly. She finished it. The Tartarus Penitentiary common room was a sterile, concrete tomb. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a ghostly pallor across the faces of the prisoners within. There were no smiles here. No camaraderie. Just dull eyes, twitchy movements, and guards stationed like statues. At one end of the room, mounted high on the reinforced wall, a flickering television played, the only permitted entertainment, fed through heavily censored government channels. Its sound was barely above a whisper, but every prisoner in the room subconsciously watched it, if only because there was nothing else. Himiko Toga sat alone near the back, her knees drawn up to her chest, head twitching side to side ever so slightly. Her long blonde hair was tangled and dull, and deep bags hung under her eyes. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, but that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the thirst. She liked her lips reflexively. It was instinctual at this point. Her body ached. Her cork ached. Without BLD, without regular contact with even a drop of it, her body was turning on her. Her nerves burned, her muscles spasmed in her sleep, and her skin felt like it was always crawling. They gave her injections to dull the effects. It only made her hallucinate more vividly. She hadn't tasted BLD in months. Not a sliver. Not even her own. They stopped letting her have sharp utensils after she'd shattered a toothbrush and tried to drink from her own wrist. Now she sat there, cradling her knees, mumbling something unintelligible to herself. Drip, 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 red like cherry pop, pop goes the vein. On the screen, another government report droned on. Tartarus reform measures continue to be debated following the shocking exoneration of Stain and the high-profile prosecution of 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 by Special Prosecutor Saori Midoriya. Toga's eyes twitched. Then the channel cut to a commercial. And everything stopped. The screen turned black. Then a sudden snap. And music began to play, jazzy, upbeat, just cheesy enough to feel cheap, just catchy enough to sink in. A woman stepped into frame, walking down a hallway lined with prison bars, cigar in her hand, a loosened tie around her neck, a smirk playing at her lips. Is the system crushing you with the full weight of the law? Did you get caught doing what everyone else just hides better? Or maybe, she said, turning and staring directly into the camera with predatory charm, you just set off the wrong pro-hero. A flash of the logo appeared in bold green letters. Better call Saori. Toga blinked. The name sounded familiar. The ad continued. I'm Saori Midoriya. I don't care if you're a saint or a psycho, if you've got a case and a coin purse, I'll fight the law until the law bleeds. Villain, vigilante, or victim, everyone deserves a defense. The words hit Toga like a freight train. A defense. She never got a real defense. They just locked her up and wrote her off as unstable, not even dangerous, just broken. They sedated her, contained her, treated her like a rabid dog. But that woman on the screen, she had defended Stain. She'd humiliated heroes. She'd stared down All Might's ghost and spat in the face of everything that claimed to be justice. Toga's heart beat faster. Call now for a free consultation. The ad finished, with a phone number flashing in bold text. Toga laughed. A breathless, high-pitched, cracked giggle. It drew the eyes of two nearby inmates. The guards tensed. But she didn't care. She'll talk to me, Toga whispered, eyes wide, her grin growing feral. She'll listen. She'll understand. She stood up, slowly, shakily. Bloodless as she was, her body protested every movement. Her joints ached. Her spine felt like glass. Her fingers trembled violently. Still, she stumbled toward the payphone bolted to the far wall. A guard moved to intercept, but paused when he saw she wasn't armed, not that she could be, and then noticed the screen. He narrowed his eyes. You want to make a call, freak? Toga turned her head slowly, giving him a grin that didn't touch her eyes. Mitchum, I've got a lawyer to call. The call 3 minutes later, through gritted teeth and tremors, Toga dialed the number. It rang once. Twice. Then, you've reached the law offices of Saori Midoriya. If you're calling to whine, hang up. If you're calling to pay, leave a message. Beep. Toga inhaled. Her lips trembled. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall beside the phone. This is Himiko Toga, she whispered, her voice shaky and small, childlike and cracked with madness. I saw your ad. I'm in Tartarus. I'm not like the others. Not really. They made me worse. They hurt me. They didn't ask why I did it. They just locked me away. She paused. Her voice dropped to a manic whisper. I need you. I'll be good. I'll tell you everything. Please. Another moment of silence. Then she said it again, as if it were a sacred invocation. Better call Saori. The lights in Saori Midoriya's law office burned well past midnight. Stacks of case files, red-stamped, sealed, restricted, were spread across her desk like fallen dominoes. The room smelled of old paper, fine cigar smoke, and hot coffee that had gone cold in a chipped mug labeled, I literally win. Saori sat at her desk, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, green vest wrinkled from hours of legal trench warfare. Her braid was slightly loose, strands of raven black hair curled along the edges of her face. She was halfway through writing a SBMSN to the Court of Quirk Appeals when her phone buzzed beside her coffee-stained legal pad. New voicemail. Timestamp, 3:07 p.m. She tapped to play it, only half listening at first. This is Himiko Toga. Saori froze. The name registered instantly. She sat up straight, paused her recording pen, and turned up the speaker. A brief hiss of static followed. I saw your ad. I'm in Tartarus. I'm not like the others. Not really. They made me worse. They hurt me. They didn't ask why I did it. They just locked me away. There was a tremble in the girl's voice. It was unfiltered pain, the kind Saori had heard in victims and villains alike, but this wasn't calculated manipulation. It wasn't an act. It was raw. I need you. I'll be good. I'll tell you everything. Please, Hippos. Better call Saori. The beep cut through the silence like a razor. Saori leaned back in her chair, her fingers tented beneath her chin. Himiko Toga, she whispered aloud. She turned to her desktop. Her keyboard clicked as she brought up her private database, fed by deep archives, contacts within the Public Safety Commission, some willing, some bought, and surveillance leaks scraped from dubious corners of the net. Toga, Himiko. Age, quirk, transform. Status, incarcerated. Facility, Tartarus. Arrest record. Incident reports. Psychiatric evaluations. Combat data. Saori's eyes narrowed as she read line by line. Excessive force used during capture. Subject sedated for prolonged PRDs. Side effects include disassociation, hallucinations, tremors. Initial incident triggered by quirk-driven BLD obsession. Psychiatric instability due to quirk withdrawal. Zero therapeutic intervention. Saori's jaw tightened. The deeper she dug, the worse it looked. No due process. No trial. Just danger class, high, RBB stamped by the HPSC and buried under Tartarus classified layers. Her parents had abandoned her. Her quirk had been misunderstood, feared, even by the medical community. And instead of help, she'd been silenced with sedatives. Jesus, Saori muttered, dragging her hand down her face. This wasn't just another villain. Toga had been sick, and no one had bothered to ask why. The decision, she stood up abruptly and walked to the window. The city lights glittered like fractured glass below, cold and indifferent. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping soundly under the illusion that the system protected them. Saori lit a cigar and stared at the skyline, the flame of her lighter briefly illuminating her face. She had defended murderers. She had walked villains back into the light or deeper into the darkness, depending on the paycheck. But this wasn't about the law. This was about principle. She didn't need the money. All for One's retainer was still stacked in offshore accounts and gold bullion bars. She didn't need the fame. She was already hated and hailed in equal measure. But she did need to know that the law could be more than just a sword, that sometimes it could be a shield. She tapped her cigar on the windowsill, exhaled, and turned back toward her desk. Saori pulled out a fresh folder, labeled it State vs. Toga, Himiko, and scrawled 2 words in all caps across the top in her elegant, looping script, pro bono. She picked up her phone. Hey, it's Saori. I need a sealed visitor permit for Tartarus. Yes, sir. No, not for him. New client. The pause. Yes, I am serious. Her name's Toga. Himiko. I'll be sending the notice to the court first thing in the morning. Pull her file. Uncensored. Then she sat down. Lit by the flicker of a desk lamp and the burn of her cigar, Saori Midoriya started preparing for her next war. But this time, she wasn't defending a monster. She was defending the system from becoming one.